roll call because this is a virtual meeting. So I'm going to start with the people that I see. So just say here. Andrea.
Yes.
Great. Christine.
Here.
Dee.
Here.
Yes.
Greg.
Here.
Phil.
Yes.
John.
Here.
Dean.
That me? Yes.
Yeah. Dick.
Here.
Parashar.
Here.
Lois.
Here.
Wade.
Here.
Ryan.
Here.
Great. Okay. I need to say that also that this meeting is being recorded and it will be broadcast. It's being broadcast on the Minuteman Media Network. So let's get started. We don't have any minutes available, so we can go right into the other items on our agenda. The first two items on our agenda came out of the debt subcommittee, the work that the debt subcommittee is doing. The first one is a letter to the capital planning task force, specifically Elise. And this is a letter, I hope you've all had a chance to look at it. I think the letter basically lays out the reasons why we would hope that the recommendations that the committee makes to the select board for their consideration would include a capital plan and a debt capacity plan underlying that. I think the letter is silent on whether we think the committee should be a standing committee or whether they should recommend a standing committee. And I think it's also silent on the size of the project that would qualify it as being part of their consideration. So with that in mind, I'm open to comments about the letter. Does anybody want to weigh in? Dee.
Yeah, on the the middle of the second paragraph where it starts recommendations. I'm thinking that might be a separate paragraph. Do you see where it is?
No.
Okay, you have the thank you is the first paragraph, then the finance committee, excuse me, it's the third paragraph. The finance committee is the second paragraph. Then again, the finance committee believes is the third paragraph.
Yeah.
And the 1, 2, 3, 4, fifth line from the bottom starts recommendations at town meeting by the committee will no longer be ad hoc. And I think that should be a separate paragraph, but I'm also wondering I'm wondering if it's premature to say that. If you're saying will no longer be ad hoc, that means you want to have it with the 10-year capital plan and you want to have it with other information. Is that correct?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure we're saying a 10-year capital plan. We haven't really specified the number of years for the capital plan. We're just saying.
In her presentation, she addresses a 10-year.
Okay, but that's still an open question. We're not saying it should be. We're not specifying.
We're not, okay.
We're
All
not.
right.
We're not, right? But what? So I'm sorry. Your second point was what?
Well, it says here recommendations at town meeting by the committee. I'm assuming the finance committee.
Yep.
Or, okay, will no longer be ad hoc. That means we are not going to be taking one at a time votes on a capital project?
No. Go ahead, Parashar. You.
I think what it could be clarified a little bit, perhaps, to basically say a capital plan, something along the lines, I think this is what you were thinking, Mary. A capital plan would ensure that recommendations at town meeting by the FinCom would no longer be made on an ad hoc basis. That I think is what you mean, right?
Okay, that's a good, I think that's a good way of rewriting that sentence.
Say that again, please, and I'll capture what you said, and then we can talk about it again. Go some more.
Okay, so a capital plan.
Yep.
Would ensure that recommendations.
Yep.
And then you've got the town meeting.
Yep.
By the finance committee.
Yep.
Will no longer be made on an ad hoc basis.
Good. Good.
Or would no longer be made.
Would
no longer.
Got it. Okay, good.
Okay.
Greg,
Greg's got his hand up.
yeah,
Yeah,
Greg,
I assume here you're referring to ad hoc as that we're doing these one by one
right.
currently in the finance committee. I believe that we're always going to have to do them one by one, no matter if they're part of the capital plan or not,
That's true.
right? So
That's
we
true.
can't go saying ad hoc, right? The middle school is going to come up and we're going to have to do it by the middle school. It's not going to be the middle school with the capital plan, right? The capital plan will be hopefully be part of.
I
But the
don't
middle
think,
school-
I don't think we're saying that we're never going to do an ad hoc recommendation again. I don't think we're limiting ourselves to say that we're never do that again. I think what we're saying is that we can minimize the amount of ad hoc things we do, and they'll be more part of a plan. So
The statement basically says we'll no longer be ad hoc is what
Right.
is it
Right.
in your letter?
yeah, okay,
Right.
so yeah, so you think it is limiting us?
It's ambiguous.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like we need to be able to do it one at a time to say, yes, we recommend this, or no, we don't.
Yep.
So I think saying ad hoc, I think kind of constrains us a little bit.
How about I just
Mary?
take out the sentence?
I would, well,
There you go.
I would just
Wait.
take out the term, I would take out the term ad hoc. I would say recommendations by the finance committee will be supported by a debt capacity analysis.
I like that.
Yeah,
Good.
Just get rid of ad hoc. That gets rid of the ambiguity.
Let me,
Recommendations at
can I
town meeting
comment?
by the finance committee will be supported by a debt capacity analysis tied to the capital plan,
Yes.
right? Got it.
that sounds good. I mean, I think the intent was that we don't want to have these things coming out of silos and coming to us one at a time. I think that's the intention. The intention is that they're integrated into some sort of plan, and that, we do have to evaluate them one by one, but they're not coming from these stovepipe areas of the town that say, oh, we need this now. I think that's the intent.
Yes, that was the intention.
So.
Okay, so
one
let me
thing,
read, let me read,
I mean,
let me read what
we
I've
don't want
heard
ad
people
hoc.
say. Okay, so this sentence would be rewritten to say, recommendations at town meeting will be supported by a debt capacity analysis tied to the capital plan.
I would say would.
Would.
and Mary, I would say recommendations at town meeting by the finance committee.
Finance
Don't-
committee, yes.
Don't lose
you're
that
right.
link.
Yep. Yep. There are other places in the letter too where I say committee without specifying it's the finance committee, because I was saying finance committee too many times. But I think I have to clarify that it is the finance committee.
I think you do. Yeah.
So
I
what you can
agree.
use there is just the shorthand, just use FinCom.
Okay, yeah, I'll put that in parentheses the first time I say finance
Yeah.
committee, and then from then on I can use that. Great. Okay, good. What else?
I had just two small, like nits, Mary.
Go ahead.
In the last line of the second paragraph, funding such requests, plural. The financial
Yeah.
implication of funding such
Yes.
requests,
Yep, you're right.
right? And then the very last line before, on the second page, the last sentence, thank you for asking for our input, singular.
Yep,
That's it for me.
you moved an
Mary, I had a
S.
Question for
You
you.
moved an S, Chris.
Mary, I had a question for you in the first paragraph.
Yeah,
The sentence that says large capital projects,
yep,
on the other hand, are reviewed by the committee as requested.
yep.
Is that the committee requesting, or is it the originators of the project that do the
That-
request?
Parashar, this is where finance committee should have been put before committee.
Okay, so, okay, thank you.
Yes, this is another one where the committee is too big. We don't know what committee I'm talking about.
No, but who does the requesting?
The budget entities.
Okay, so because it's not us requesting a
No, we're
review.
not requesting.
Right.
They're
What
coming to
happens
us.
if they don't request our review?
They have to, because we
have
have
to
to
keep
give a
it- yeah.
recommendation in the town, in the finance committee report, where we give a recommendation on all.
So then maybe we strike the word as requested if it's mandatory.
Well, it was meant to get to the point as they come up. So
So
if you want,
maybe when requested. as opposed to
Yeah.
as requested.
Yeah.
Yep.
Make it clear that it's temporal rather than conditional.
I like that. When? Everybody okay with that? I just replaced the word as with when,
That was the point, remember? Yeah, they're
because
all-
they are requested by. Anything else? Okay, we made a few changes. Are people generally okay with sending this letter? If so, I'd like a motion.
So moved.
Do I have a
Second.
Great. Okay, so I have the motion.
Sorry, so what's the motion is
What's the
to,
motion? Lois,
is-
you want to?
The motion is to send the letter as revised through this conversation to the chair of the capital planning task force.
And who was the second?
Oh,
I
somebody
second it.
else.
Great. Okay, I'll go around again and take a vote, please. Andrea,
you're muted, Andrea. But she said
Yes.
yes.
yes. Myself, Mary Hartman, yes. Chris?
Yes.
Dee?
Yes,
Greg?
Yes.
Phil?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Dean?
Yes.
Dick?
Yes.
Parashar?
Yes.
Lois?
Yes.
Wade?
Yes.
Brian?
Yes.
Kathy? You're muted, Kathy. You're still muted, I'm
You're very
sorry.
quiet if you're not muted.
Not muted, but we can't hear her.
Now she's muted. Yep.
It's a squeaky,
Give
okay.
us a
Maybe
thumbs up if.
Put
Yeah,
your
give us a
thumb up,
thumbs
up.
thumb up, yes, yes.
There you go.
Thank you. Okay, it's unanimous. Thank you very much.
Mary,
Um,
may I make one just final comment, not particularly related to the wordsmithing of this
Yeah,
letter,
go
but
ahead.
in 2003, there was a similar sort of long-term capital planning plan that was proposed. I think Carl might have been in some capacity involved in that. Most of the rest of us, of course, was far before our time, but it wasn't adhered to, frankly, at all. So I don't know how or when or what the right context or time frame or whatever to sort of suggest. Can you guys hear me?
We
does my
can
sound
hear you,
okay?
Kathy.
Yeah.
Kathy,
I think you have to go back on
something's
mute.
happening with your audio. Yeah, I think you're squeaking. I mean, I'm sorry, but it sounds to us like a squeak. I know you're not squeaking. You're fine now. You're fine now. Thank you. Thank you, John. Go ahead.
So that's my only point, Mary, is wouldn't it be great if after all the great hard work that everyone puts into this long-term capital planning, plan that we craft, that it's actually adhered to? That's my only point.
I agree with you. And I think that what we tried to do when we said in the third paragraph, a capital plan together with the institutional commitment to adhere to that plan.
Thank you. Excellent.
That's
Yeah.
why that is there. It's up to the people that take it from here to make that happen. You make a really good point. Okay, good. Let's move on to the next item on our agenda, which I believe is an update on the work that the debt subcommittee is doing. And I'm going to turn this over to Parashar. Parashar, take it away.
All right, thank you, Mary. So we're going to try to limit this to basically 10 to 15 minutes. What Mary, Christine, Dee, and I wanted to do was provide you with a framework that we're considering for a discussion with FinCom in December about debt service and the current state. In December, we'll come have a discussion based on this outline that I'm going to share in a minute around the current state, and we hope also to include some recommended actions for FinCom to take, basically. And so what we'd like to do today is not focus on recommended actions, because I know lots of folks have ideas, et cetera, and there'll be plenty of time for that, but focus on the topics that we hope to cover and include in the current state. And let me add one other person that's really important, and that's Carrie, because she's also been helpful and will be helpful in filling out the current state and providing us with a good picture. So let me share my screen here. I've got a few slides that I can share in a minute if I can. And I'm liking Zoom less and less over time.
Usually at the bottom, you'll find a share screen.
It's not, I know how to use
There
it.
you go. You're good.
Sometimes it doesn't share the app that you want. So with that as an outline, again, this is a proposed discussion. We just want to provide an overview. We're going to take notes on input, and then we'll talk about next steps. So at a high level, the framework that we thought that might be helpful is have a discussion around definitions, right? And I'll go into a little bit detail on each one of these in a minute. The next one is, why is debt and debt service important? What are some recent trends? And when you look at the trends, you walk away because we've looked at some preliminary trends. And one of the first questions I raised, I sort of shrugged my shoulder like, yeah, seems okay, but what's the context, right? Is it too much? Is it about right? Is it too little? And then we'd have a focus around debt management, a section on debt management. So definitions, right? What is long-term capital planning? What is a bond? Some basic definitions around capital borrowing, debt, so that we're all on the same page. What's a general obligation bond? How does it differ from revenue bonds, et cetera? And so if you've got terms that you think you would like to make sure we include in here, Mary, do you want me to raise my hand, or do you want to raise your hand for collecting input as members think about these ideas over the course of time?
I can do that.
Okay, so send them to Mary in terms of if you got definitions that you want to make sure are included, send them to Mary, we'll make sure they're included. The second section is around state law governing capital spending. Now, obviously, we're not free because we're a municipality to go ahead and spend however we want and where we want. And so this is where we would cover topics like, well, what can we actually finance through capital spending? How does it get financed? What are the school's current processes and policies? What are the town's processes and policies? What do enterprise funds do? And then who are the actual decision makers, right? Obviously town meeting, but before that, there are a series of decisions, recommendations that get made. And we would make sure we would want to cover all of these topics under that topic. The other thing I'll note is some of these topics are also going to be explored by the capital planning committee, task force. So there's a little bit of overlap. I'm on both committees, so hopefully I can serve a little bit of a bridge between some of the information that's being gathered there, and Carrie's on there also. So between the two of us, we'll make sure to minimize any duplication of effort on the part of Carrie and others, both at the town and the school, Jared, to make sure the information is just collected once. Third area is, again, why is this important? I think we all instinctively know why, but again, just to make sure that we're on the same page, right? Objectively, like why does this matter? And then the other topics, again, what are the recent trends for town of Concord and other similar towns that are similar to Concord, demographics, financial, tax base, et cetera. And again, that may help frame some of the answers to the context, too little, too much, et cetera. What do the trends look like? And then the last section we thought might be helpful is debt management, right? Who's responsible for debt management? What are the town's policies today? What are the role of rating agencies? And what are the tools available to manage debt, et cetera? So we thought if we've got a good picture of the current state, then collectively we can maybe develop some recommendations based on where we think we want to go. In other words, the desired state, and what's the sort of transition plan to go from current state to desired state, and presumably those are the recommendations that we would come to FinCom eventually, and then Finance Committee would eventually make recommendations to the appropriate entities in town, whether it's a select board, town manager, school board, superintendent, etc. So I know that was a lot to absorb in five or 7 minutes, but let me pause here and see if there's questions, comments, additions, subtractions to this basic outline.
Parashar, there's one thing that I would like to add would be when we're talking about Concord's policies or the town's policies or the school's policies, I think we need to add practices, because we've got some practices that we add the word practices because we have some practices that aren't official policies that really do guide some of our debt decisions. So that's my thought. And Chris?
Yeah, so I just wanted to say that this is an exploration for us. We don't really, know that we would come out with recommendations. We may go through this and conclude this all makes perfect sense and we're good. So it's an educational kind of deep dive for us, but it doesn't mean we're going to have recommendations. So we may or we may not. That's part of what the committee would need to discuss.
Yeah, good point. I agree.
Yep. Yeah.
Dean.
Just keeping in mind that our charter is to advise town meeting. Most of the advisory role that we've ever been involved with has involved commenting on proposals in warrant articles and actions against those. We started in a trend with the 5-year tax plan, where the town specifically asked us to advise the town as to what the future looked like in terms of taxes. We might be able to tuck this in underneath that, and we, on our own hook, decided that we ought to be looking at the SGR as a forward view of the way our spending, ought to try to trend. So that's, within the concept of advisory. What kind of, role would this play within the things that we do as a finance committee, I guess, is my question. So that's the question. Are we going back to entities and saying, no, you can't have this bond, or don't issue, any future large debt issuances for another 5 years? I don't know how this is going to play. That's the main question I have in our capacity as advising town meeting.
So I'll take a stab at maybe answering that. And I see Wade raised his hand. I think I'll go back to what Christine said, right? I don't think we know yet what recommendations, if any, might come out of looking at current state. All of us might say, well, you know what? Generally speaking, the town is healthy, practices and policies seem to be okay. And, and there's no recommendations or nothing for us to do. Number one, we also, I think, have to be mindful. Part of this work overlaps with what the capital planning task force is doing, where they actually are trying to develop a process for very large projects, right? And there's going to be some recommendations coming out of that. And whether or not some of our recommendations, when we look at the current state, overlap with those, I think that's TBD. I don't know, Mary, Christine, D, do you have other thoughts? You're muted, Christine.
Chris, you're muted.
Sorry about that. As I said, I think we wanted, Dean, we saw that one of the things that can torque the tax bill is debt service, not surprisingly. So I think as part of our role in thinking through what's happening with the tax rate, we wanted to understand more about how does debt work and how much do we have and how much capacity do we have. So I think even as we in our role to approve warrant articles as they come to us, it just serves us well to have a good understanding of debt. And I think that's where we started from. I don't know that we would have anything, it's a very good question. So if we had recommendations, you're absolutely right. We have to think through, is this our place to put this forward or is it not? Is it some other group? And, how strongly do we feel about it? Is it something that we think is fiscally prudent, like we do the capital plan? And so that's something we may want to have a voice on. But you're absolutely right. We have to, depending on what we come up with, would then to say, okay, is there something to do here or not? I don't know that there's anything to do.
Yeah, I'll just try to give you a little bit of context on why I even brought that up. Tom, and then I'm following Tom as the chair. We received from certain quarters within the town a lot of pushback that even the SGR that we were developing, we were outside of our, we were outside of the rails we needed to stay within, the box that we were supposed to be, that's out of scope for you guys. Don't get involved in that. So that all I'm saying is that there's likely to be some pushback from some areas. That's all.
Well, I would think that if part of our charge to the town is to advise on financial matters, yes, we do that by making recommendations on warrant articles that require debt. But that doesn't limit us to just making recommendations on warrant articles that require debt.
Right.
I think we can also advise the town on policies or practices that also encumber the town with debt. So that would be my argument. That would be my argument to people.
We just need to have our ducks in a row, I guess is my point. That's all.
Wade, you were going to say something.
It gets back to terms. I agree with Christine. I'm not sure we're in a position to, make firm and fast recommendations, but I think it's a good investigation. We're going to get a lot of data from other towns and see where we fall. I mean, one thing that occurs to me is that often comes up as an issue when you exceed the levy limit. So I think defining debt exclusion as it pertains to municipal financing would be helpful, because that always raises red flags, especially at town meeting. Right? If we're within the levy limit, then it doesn't seem to be a big issue for people. But once you exceed the levy limit and then you're in the exclusion, then the flags get raised. Now, I'm not sure that's where we want to be raising flags. I'm not saying that, but that seems to trigger a lot of conversation at town meeting.
Wade, can I ask a few more questions? Are you saying that when we ask for excluded debt, which is really debt outside of the levy limit, that gets more attention at town meeting than if the debt that's approved within the levy limit? Or maybe I didn't.
That's my perception. It's
okay.
It's like the town is crossing a threshold that the taxpayers,
Yep.
laid out there. I mean, that was the whole purpose of Prop 2.5 many years ago, right? That the towns wouldn't go spend like crazy.
Yep.
So the voters kind of put the bar at 2.5, and every time we cross that bar, that seems to raise a lot of concern. It's a matter of perception. It's not a matter of what's right or what's wrong. Do other people see it that way?
I think I agree. I think there's a sensitivity when you get into excluded debt and go beyond it. Certainly, I think there's sensitivity is heightened.
Do you think people think of excluded debt as an override?
Yes.
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 Dean,
you're muted. Dean, you're muted.
Sorry about that. I think it takes, I think we have to be kind of precise in the use of our language here. A levy limit override, which is exceeding Prop 2.5, and a debt exclusion are fundamentally the same thing in one way, and they're very different in another way.
yes, go ahead.
They're the same in that we're kind of voting at the ballot box to ignore the state's requirement that you stay within a certain threshold.
Yep.
Okay, they're both votes at the ballot box to get that done. However, debt eventually goes away. And when you vote at the ballot box for an operating override over 2.5%, that's permanent. That adds a permanent uplift to your spending allowance. So they are different in that way, and we need to be kind of careful because we're specifically talking about debt, and debt it has a different nature when it plays out over 20 years or 10. That's just the way it is.
Good point.
So.
Any other questions for Parsha?
For the whole committee, we were all part of this.
No, but we're asking you. Okay, I think what we're trying to do, I think, is we're trying to understand the current state of our debt, of the debt that we pay every year in our property taxes. So if you've got any, definitions that you would like us to explore, or anything else that you would like us to explore, let us know. And that's what we will include as we kind of, as Chris said, do the deep dive to get a better understanding of debt.
And I'm glad to, should I circulate the outline to the members and to Carrie,
Yes.
so it's in the record, right?
Yes, yes, Carrie, that's
I'll go ahead and do that.
we can do that, right, Carrie?
I'd like to, oh, Carrie, were you gonna get on to talk?
Yeah,
I was just saying, yes, we can circulate that.
Oh,
Right.
okay. I was gonna ask Carrie if she has any interest in giving us suggestions of topics we should cover based on questions that you get from people over the years. It might be definitions, it might be, small topics. If you think of any, please let Parashar know, right?
well, I
Or
think
no,
I
Mary's collecting the.
agreed to collect those. So what are you saying, Dee, that
Yeah.
you're saying if,
I'm just asking
Mary,
Carrie
you're
that if
asking Carrie.
over the course of her work here, that people have come in and there seem to be certain questions they always ask about definitions associated with debt or excluded debt or whatever whatever falls within the realm of what we're looking at.
okay,
And if she does have, if some come to mind, then we should certainly have those on our list of definitions to review.
okay. Okay, great. Thank you, Parashar. Thank you for walking us through that. Okay, the next item on our agenda is the FY22 guideline process. Believe it or not, it's not too soon to start thinking about that. I've asked Chris to put together kind of an outline, which will get us all grounded. Once the new year turns and we're in January, our work is really going to be probably 90% the guideline process. So Chris, you want to walk us through how you envision?
Yes, sure. Now, I don't know if you guys all have the material, if
We
there's a
do.
way for me to share it or not. Let's see if I can do that. If I bring the document up, and then how do I share it? Because the Word document is in front. Oh, here we go. Let's see. That doesn't look like it's doing anything. You guys can't see anything, right?
Not yet.
Well.
Does everybody have sharing rights?
Somebody squeaky audios.
Okay. I don't know what it's doing. It shows share computer sound. Oh, hold on. Share here. Can you see it now? No.
No.
No. Okay.
Chris,
It's my firewall
Would
is
you
not.
like me to share it?
Yep.
Carrie could share it.
If you want to give me sharing rights, I'm happy to. This is the
can share it,
document
Brian.
you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. You want to do it?
You
Sure.
want to do it?
Great.
Make Brian a co-host.
Can you do that, Carrie?
No, it says all panelists can share.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
There it is. Okay, perfect. Thank you, Brian.
Sure.
Okay, so I thought it'd be helpful to go through the process and talk about a couple of the aspects of it in particular. It's an unusual process. It's a bit of science and a bit of art, and it's iterative, and you'll see that as we go through it. So it does have some components, though, that happen in a certain order, and that's really what I wanted to take you through, kind of at a high level. So obviously the guideline is meant to be just that, a guideline to the budgeting entities, the town and each of the school systems for our recommendation for the changes in taxes, right? So whether it goes up a certain percentage, down a certain percentage, or stays flat. So that's the recommendation essentially that we put forth. And we do it twice. We have a preliminary guideline that we'll put out on January I think it's 21st. And then we'll have a final that we'll put out on February 26th. So those are the 2 dates that'll be critical to the guidelines.
Right.
So how do we do that? So as you might imagine, so we're trying to say, all right, so how much can taxes move? Property taxes move, it's specific to property taxes. And we do that by looking at a couple different things. So we gather some information. One of the first things we get to is the revenue projections. So we're off to go figure out, so through Kerry, we'll get information on what people expect FY22 revenue to look like. So 86% or so of our revenue is related to property taxes. So that's not difficult for us to estimate. And one of the things that's different from 2008 when we had a financial crisis is property values actually declined in connection with that crisis. Property taxes, particularly in the suburbs, are not declining related to COVID. They're actually, property values, I should say, are not declining related to COVID. They're actually rising as people are sort of fleeing some of the urban centers. So I think we have probably some pretty good information that Carrie will pull for us on what we can predict for our base property taxes. And again, that's 84 to 86% of our revenue. So that's good. But we do have state aid, both in the town and in the schools, and we also have local receipts. So that's another, it's somewhere in 10 to 15% of our overall revenue. So that will probably have some declines in it. We'll see. That's part of what Carrie will help guide us through. We'll have some estimates there, some ranges of what we think will occur with property taxes. And, it's an estimate, right? This process is one that we do a year out. We're in, an area where we have uncertainty, not just because of COVID, but because of what you can predict for the future. So, but that's what we do. So we make some estimates on revenue. Yes, Dean.
The only thing about gathering inputs on property taxes is that taxes are actually derivative. In other words, they're the output of the process. I think to have them in the front end, I mean, maybe property values, but property taxes are what we are actually at the last page of this document is what we're trying to figure out. Like how much will property taxes go up?
Right, but we have a base, right?
I guess, yeah.
We have it. So I'm thinking
we have last year.
Start with a base, and then you're right. You'll have growth or change in value, but we do have a kind of a base number that she has in the model. We can use last year's tax rate with a base property value. I mean, I think that's what we do. So
that's where well, actually, it's the total levy, or maybe Carrie, you could explain how we do it, but I think it's the total levy. It doesn't have that much to do with property. It's just like, here's the levy. Maybe and then we back into it based on median value or something like that.
So our starting point, what we've used for the last several years is the percentage that we're under the levy limit. So say for fiscal 21, we're 4% under the levy limit. We'll build the first model for 22, keeping us at 4% under the levy limit.
okay.
So that's just based off the total tax levy, correct? That's just like, here's the total.
Yes.
Total that you can property. Kathy, you have there's issues with your audio.
I'd recommend that Kathy uses the chat function.
So Carrie, at the end of the day, though, the levy that you develop for the guidelines process is based on all of the factors Chris has laid out, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So I think, Chris, that's what you were trying to get at.
Yep, exactly. Right. So we come forward with what we think revenue is going to be. And this is meant to be conceptual to kind of walk you through the process, right? So we have revenues that we're going to be expecting to receive, and then we essentially deduct from those what we think of as fixed or non-guideline expense projections. So the committee does not, in fact, provide a guideline on these expenses. So these are considered fixed or non-discretionary, and those include the post-employment benefits, pension, health insurance, the Minuteman assessment, and debt service. And so those, I think, are the big components of what we sort of, again, you have to estimate what they're going to be. A lot of them are known, debt service in particular. And then we deduct that and we sort of say, okay, that's kind of the pool of income, if you will, or, that we can bounce up against spending. Then we also have a few other considerations. We started out talking about the levy limit capacity. So how much can we actually tax under Prop 2.5? Doesn't mean you couldn't go beyond that, but we want to understand how far can we go, and that's what Kerry was talking about. So I think it's around $4 to $5 million most recently. That's been the capacity that we've had under the Prop 2.5 limit. So we want to know what that is. We also want to know what our reserves are. So to the extent that one didn't want to increase taxes to match spending, there are some reserves that in the past we have used to offset tax growth. There are ones at the town. The one at the town that we speak of is free cash. It's sort of the, it's taxes that were collected in the past that are retained. They are reserves, if you will. And we usually like to keep, I'd say, a floor of 5 to 6 million at the end of fiscal 2020. I think we maybe had around 11 million, Carrie, if I'm right.
Yes.
Yes, and we just voted at town meeting to spend, I think, 3 million of that. So we spent 2 million for debt stabilization. We had $500,000 for affordable housing, and we had $500,000 for it was one other item. I can't remember, it was buses or something. We had a couple of other free cash items that I think added up to another $500,000.
Well, then we also had the $1 million to offset this year's too.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Right.
And we took a piece off
We
for
took
tax.
another $1 million, right? So, and it was
So
50,000 for the buses, but go ahead.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
so I think we have eaten into
Yeah.
a fair amount of that 11 million at this point, but still we may want to look to it. At the schools, they have a different process, and they have something called excess and deficiency, which is E&D. They themselves will look at that in terms of when they come forward with their spend request, but it's something that we will ask them about as well, because they do carry reserves. They're a little different. Some of them are very specific, so they're related to, you can have reserves there beyond E&D, which is general. They also have things called circuit breaker, which is tied to special education spending. So there are more nuances to the school reserves, and we'll get into that when we meet with them. But there are reserves there as well that we can be thinking about.
And Chris, just for the newer members, the E&D is relative to the district, not to Concord Public Schools.
Correct.
So
Right.
the reserves that are available to Concord Public Schools are the same reserves that are available to the town.
Right. So so CPS, the kindergarten through 8th grade, is really a component of the town. We see the budget separately, and they are under the, they have a school committee, and they have a superintendent that goes through their budgets, and you'll see them as a budget entity. But in the end, their budget flows through the town budget. The regional high school is a completely separate budgeting entity. They can raise their own debt, and they obviously split the cost between ourselves and Carlisle. So that's a bit of a different animal, and you'll see that as we go through it. But they do have their own reserves as well at the high school. Okay, and then we have so now we have some revenue. We know about that. We know how much we can tax without bumping into 2.5. We know what the reserves that we have. This is information that we'll show to you. And then you're left with, okay, well, what else do we need to worry about? This is the guidelines. So you come down to, what does our committee get involved with? And we get involved in looking at the tax implications of the spending that I called operating this outline, which is the schools and the towns provide us information in 2 sessions. In January, we'll meet with each of these groups to talk about essentially their history and current state. So they'll talk to us about the past 2 years of spending, as well as where they are in FY '21 to date. And they'll come forward and they'll say, here's my budget, here's my actual. They'll talk through the large categories of spending and what's happening. And in particular this year, the thing that will make this extra interesting is COVID. So you're going to have a lot of differences in spending patterns, both at the schools and the towns that's tied to COVID. So you could have maintenance and utilities that are very different in the past year and in FY '21 than you would have seen in any earlier year. And that will inform, what we think we should predict for FY '22, which is the year we're budgeting for. But COVID, you'll see COVID running through this that will make things non-comparable to certain parts of the past. So that's, and they'll come in and they'll give us, and so the first session they have is kind of background and current information. The second round, which will happen in February, is them actually coming in with, after we've given them a preliminary guideline estimate, they're going to come back with, here's my proposed budget. So there's this two-step process. They come in, they give us the history. We consider that with a number of other factors. So the information we've already shown on the page, and we'll have a lot of dialogue about that to say, okay, this is what we recommend for change in the taxes going forward, in the property taxes. Then they'll come back reflecting, they'll have information again now, and they'll have thought it through and come back with what they project their spending will be for FY '22. And we'll see where that falls out compared with the guideline that we've given them. We'll have a dialogue and we iterate that, and then we come up with a final guideline at the end of February. So let me go to the next. Can we go to the next page?
Before we move off this page,
yeah.
can I ask a question?
Sure, please, Dean.
Yeah, so you brought up that this is going to be a very different thing in '22 because of COVID. I think somewhere under either revenue projections or under reserves or under some funny business there, we're going to have to include the CARES Act potential. So if you just throw that in on one of those two.
Yes. We also, you're absolutely right. I meant to mention that we have this other category of expense offsets. So at the schools alone, based on the most recent presentation I saw, there's $1 million that they have available to them for COVID expense offsets. Right. And there's more money that's at the town as well. And we saw that partly in the budget planning for FY '21, but we'll absolutely see it in FY '22. And that's another difference that we're going to see this year.
Carrie, Chris, can I ask Carrie a question?
Sure.
Carrie, is that money considered, are you going to bake that into the revenue projections that you put in, or is that not considered revenue?
So the only CARES Act money that the town has is money that needs to be expended by 12/31/20. So that's this fiscal year. Yep. It's, and we don't have any knowledge right now of any funds that will be available for fiscal '22.
But it's outside the budget, right, Carrie? It's a grant that you apply to, so you don't budget those expenses in the budget, right? They go outside.
That's correct.
Yeah, I think that's what you're asking for, sure.
And the money really only can be used for things that we haven't budgeted for.
Yeah.
That's on the town side. What about the schools?
Yeah.
That's the same with the schools.
What
they have a separate account.
Yep.
For their CARES Act money.
Yep.
And that will be separately audited at the end of the year. And they must, I think the amount that I have on my sheet is $290,000 that they have in total. And they've already spent 210, and they have the rest to go before December 30th of this year.
I think the combination of both groups, it's about $1 million, and they've spent about 700,000. I think that with the high school, it's a bigger number, Dee, I think.
Well, that's what he reported out on Tuesday, and
Okay.
that money, maybe he's not in control of all the money.
Yeah, that's all right.
But,
well, this is,
at the high school, that's what he was reporting.
okay. Well,
But looking forward to FY '22, right? Right now, there is
right.
there's nothing that we know, right?
Correct.
I would hopefully by January, when we're putting this together, we will have much more information about any kind of federal or state stimulus that we could expect.
Yeah, we could count,
So,
right? Yeah, right.
and-
Yeah,
and
so you're
whether
absolutely
we-
right. We might have some, we might not. We'll
You're
see.
right. Right.
Right.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so can I
Excuse
go
me.
to the next page? Thank you. So anyway, this is part of what we were talking about.
Chris, you have a question?
Excuse me a minute. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes,
Kathy. we can.
yes.
Okay, I changed computers. I apologize for interrupting, but I did have a question about levy.
Yeah.
And what is that and how does it relate to property values and tax assessments?
Carrie, you want to explain that one?
That's a I'm trying to think, what's
Should I take
what's
this
the-
offline somewhere? Should I learn this
No, I-
somewhere else?
I mean, it is the
Well, the-
taxes, right? So it's what you levy on the taxpayer. So it's the total taxes that we collect, I guess, that we propose. So I think that's, that's the concept. The tax levy is what you're putting on the taxpayer.
I think a
when-
good
and when-
start, a
when-
good start for you, Kathy, would be to look at the Finance Committee report that talks about the levy limit and how it's, where we are relative to the levy limit and how it's calculated. Unless, Carrie, do you feel confident giving
No,
that?
I got it. The
Right.
levy limit is under Proposition 2.5.
That's right.
Right.
And it's,
Okay. Okay. Thank you. And I'm glad that I can now be heard when I want to ask a
We-
question.
Good. I'm
Yeah, we
glad-
are
Thank
too.
you, everybody.
glad too. Okay, I'm sorry. Did anybody else? I can, my screen, I'm only seeing, I don't have everybody on my screen, so I'm not sure I can see if anybody else has their hand up, but
I
if they
think
do, let
we
me.
heard just chirp and then your screen will become visible to the rest of the group on the side there.
I do what?
Just say a few words, just become
Oh,
audible.
okay.
And then your picture will come to the surface.
Okay, got it. Right. Okay. So there's a model. So there's a model that Carrie maintains that helps us do this. So she comes forward with the inputs that we talked about. What is the levy limit? What are the revenue estimates that we have? And then we'll have estimated spending. So in order to generate the preliminary guideline, we won't yet have met for the second round with either the town or the schools where they come forward with their budget request. So we'll be estimating based on what we think they may need in terms of change in spending. So we'll be looking at that, right? So you're balancing two things. What do we think is going to happen with revenue? What do we think is going to happen with expenses? And then we have this model that we iterate through that tells us if this happens, if these three criteria happen, these variables are X, what does Y come out? And Carrie, we work with her and she does this. We do this live with the, and I guess we'll do it on the Zoom meeting where we go through, the model is changing the numbers as we iterate. And it will pump out for us what the implication is of the various scenarios that we input. And that's how we iterate through it. So we come back and we say, how much room do we have in reserves? How much room do we have in the levy limit? And what does that end up to, right? If it was a 3% increase in taxes, a 5% increase in taxes, whatever the numbers crank out of the model. So that's how we do the iteration and review of and come up with, through a discussion, what we want to recommend for the tax rate growth. So I'm going to stop on that one for just to make sure because that's the first important step for us is, and that then drives, we send out that information to the budget entities and they take that into account as they develop the budgets that they come in to see us on in February. And they may come back and say, yep, I was able to meet the guideline, or no, I wasn't, and here's why. So again, we have another dialogue. There's an iterative discussion around what we think the town can take from a tax perspective and what the budget units say they need. Is that fair? So that's kind of the back and forth that we go through.
I have a comment
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah.
One of the inputs to that model and one of the ways we get to where we end up, and I think it belongs on page 1, is an estimate for new growth, which
Yes.
is basically new construction within the town, which is additions to the tax base. And we
Yes.
can make an estimate of that, and that is part of our inputs on the, it's not really a revenue item. It's like, it is actually, we end up saying this much new building construction will occur, which will generate this much more tax revenue.
Yeah.
Right.
Revenue item.
Yeah, it's a revenue item, so new growth.
Okay. And then we sort of say, okay, so now we've gone through the model and we've come out with, you know, some math, and then we look at things. So how do we consider things? How do we make a decision on preliminary and final guidelines? It's more, you know, it's more art than science now. And this is when our you know, this is where we apply our thinking to what we think makes sense, right? So how do we do that? So we look at historical tax rate growth. So there's information for us that Carrie provides. We look at the impact of capital spending on tax rates. So we're looking to say, well, gee, they have a middle school coming in. What's that going to do to the tax rate? We make some estimates on that. Might look at property values. As Dean mentioned, we'll look at expected new growth. And we also have now the sustainable growth rate. So we'll look at what comes out of the model compared to our proxy for inflation, which is a sustainable growth rate, right? So we have that as a benchmark that we use to consider against for anything we're calculating. We also can come up with other things to look at, and this is one of my questions to the committee. So what I have observed in the past, I've been through this twice, is when we get to this process, we have a lot of discussion of, well, how do we think about this, and what are the comparatives that we want to bounce this up against. So I put a few things here that I've heard us mention, and I want to talk about whether we really want to use them, and if so, how we will source them and who's going to get them, and how to, you know, so that we're ready when we come forward in January, we have the information that we want to compare our math, if you will, to what we think is reasonable. So we have the SGR, as I mentioned. We can look at one of the programs in town is there are tax reduction and deferral applications in town. So we can look to see, is that something that's growing or declining? So these are programs in town that allow people to either defer or reduce their taxes. So that might be an indicator that taxes are a problem for certain elements of the population. So that's something we can look at. That's available to us. We know if property taxes are being collected or they're a default, so people are unable to pay. We can look at that piece of information. We can look at peer community tax bills. So there's a DOR website that'll show, we would have to decide the peers. I have some ideas on that, but if you ever liked it, but they have average tax bills as a percentage per capita income. You can look at that to say, well, how does the taxes that we're proposing in Concord compare to other communities? At one point, we looked at a local unemployment rate. That really was something that was COVID related. I looked at it more recently, and I think it's much lower. I think at the time, John, you told us it was maybe 17%. I think it's down now between 5 and 6%. But still, you know, it may be something we want to think about, given that we have COVID going on. And the other thing that I thought was useful is going back to look at how we dealt with potential declines in the ability to tax because of financial crisis. I think it's a very different financial crisis, but nevertheless, you do see a decline in the tax rate it drops off. So the crisis was in 08, you can see a drop in 10 and 11, and it starts to come back up in 12. So you can look at historically what we've done with periods of financial difficulty. So those were some ideas that I had. We don't have to use any of them. We can simply stick with the SGR, but I wanted to get your input on this because I'd much rather have us get agreement now as to what we think is relevant so that we have it ready when we want to have the conversation. So I'll open it up to you guys. Any thoughts on that one?
I just had one comment about the unemployment information. You can get reasonably good unemployment information from the Department of Revenue, but it tends to lag. You end up with 2-month-old data, or maybe a month or two old. The Pioneer Institute has its own modeling, and it projects future and very instantaneous current. I don't know how important you know, 1 or 2 month lag is in terms of the numbers we might want to use as inputs to doing a 1-year budgeting process. So the DOR does a pretty good job, and they rely on the census who do something called the American Survey or something. I've forgotten exactly what the text of that is, but that's where how it's derived. So the DOR is a good place to get that.
Anybody?
Chris?
Yeah, Mary.
Yeah, Chris, the only thing I'm thinking right now is if we would want to include some information on how the businesses within Concord are doing and how that could impact their ability to pay property tax. I don't know how to get that, unfortunately. Let me see.
We might be able to interface with the business partnership.
Or the Economic Vitality Committee might have some. John, are you?
Sadly, the last meeting scheduled, there was no agenda or Zoom link. So I don't know if it took place. I was going to mention this in observer reports.
Yep.
I tried to sit in on that meeting and I couldn't, and I don't know whether it actually happened.
Andrea, were you there?
No, John is the observer to that committee now. And wasn't Jennifer supposed to, we're getting off track here, but wasn't Jennifer supposed to get John?
Yes, I don't think that meeting happened.
Okay.
They were having trouble getting a quorum and it was supposed to be rescheduled, and I haven't heard that it has been yet.
I mean, the DOR, Mary, provides like the sales tax revenue and the other receipts.
Oh, good idea. Yep.
So that's an indicator.
Yep.
I mean, good indicators we'll have, I think.
Yep.
Yeah, and we have that. Yep.
Good.
Although
So-
that's also lagged, Wade. So Carrie
Month to
can
month,
tell me,
isn't it?
it's lagged. I think
Maybe
it's a
by a
couple
month.
months or a quarter.
Well, Carrie, wouldn't you have local receipts that would tell us would local receipts be a good indicator for how the health of the restaurants and the shops in Concord?
Well, yes and no. So we receive the meals tax quarterly, a month after the close of the quarter. And it doesn't come with any data on who's paid. So we don't necessarily, we don't have any way to compare one restaurant first quarter this year, how it was doing first quarter the prior year. So it's hard for us to do a whole lot of comparisons other than just looking at the total collected in the quarter and how that compares to prior years.
Okay.
Carrie, this is Prasher. I had a couple of questions that might help because I think I don't know if it makes sense to actually look at the components of revenue and isolate each one of them and see if we can find sources that are doing analysis as to what happened in 2008. So for example, I thought, Carrie, I heard you say about 86%. How much of our revenue comes from property taxes? And of that, how much is commercial versus residential?
Yeah, so about over 90% is residential. I can't tell you off the top of my head exactly.
So
I think it's 91% to 9% commercial.
Yeah,
right. So one question I would have is I understand property values are increasing. To the extent that COVID affects taxpayers in Concord, presumably there may be a cash flow issue in which they're not able to pay the property tax. So I'm curious, in the Great Recession, to what extent did the percentage of payments on property taxes, were they late and never collected? Is there a stat that we can look at that says, geez, collections went from 98% down to, I make up a number, 95%, and it took a year or two to bounce back? Something like that, looking back, may give us some sense of what we might see in the next year or two, right? And if the commercial property taxes are so low, maybe that's something we sort of put aside, if you will, but you can also do a similar assessment off of commercial taxes. And this is where I don't know the answer. Presumably, even if the business goes belly up, the landlord is still responsible for paying the property tax, right?
That's true.
Yes.
In which case you could do a similar assessment as to what happened back there. That then takes care of a vast majority of the revenue. Terry can use her intelligence with the state and other sources to get a sense of what might or may not happen with state aid. And then similarly with local revenue. I don't know that
Yep.
there's going to be a lot of other stuff that you can go to broad macroeconomics that are going to directly affect this. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Yes.
Parshar mentioned the landlords, the commercial property owners paying the taxes, and if my memory serves me, I don't remember back in 2008 any landlords that went bust or lost their property. They are responsible for paying, and it's hard to get a sense of how the individual businesses there are doing, because I get a tax bill from my landlord. I have to pay that now. They're responsible for the whole property. There's a big empty space next to me. There's nobody paying them the taxes for that. I don't know how you're going to measure how businesses in town are actually doing, how the business community is doing.
Andrea, I don't think you have to measure it. That was
Yeah,
my
I'm not
point.
sure we do.
Other than sales
No.
tax paid
Yeah,
monthly
that we can see, right?
to the state.
But the commercial property taxes, I don't think you have to measure the health of the businesses. That was my point. You have to
Right.
go
You're
back
right.
and see what the cash flow situation was like then and say maybe something similar is going to happen here.
So we do have that data over the summer, probably before you started meeting, pretty much weekly. I was looking at that with the select board, and we pulled all of that together. And as you can imagine, it's not, there's just not much of a change year to year in what the town collects in taxes, but I'm happy to share that with you, and I can do that fairly easily.
And I think we're going to find, my hypothesis is we're going to find, fortunately for us, that there's probably not going to be much financial pressure on us. If you think about the types of businesses and the commercial property we have, the fact that we are a much wealthier population than the average, most families have the wherewithal to pay the property taxes. We might see a small drop, but I don't think it's going to significantly affect the revenues. But I think we can go back to the Great Recession, see what happened there, and use that as a guide to see what might happen here.
Okay, we're going to write that down. That was your prediction.
Yeah.
Good. So, and does anybody else have any comments? So, Dee.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if it would be good to have a conversation with the assessor. See if there's anything any trends he's seeing, responses he's getting, more people applying for this or that. I think he might be, it would be really then current information. And he might have some suggestions.
Yep. No, that's good. Yeah, that's definitely on the list. Talk to him.
Yep.
So again, I'm trying to box us a little bit in advance of the considerations we're going to have in January and February. So I want you to think about this, and you may have, you have to absorb what we talked about tonight. You've been through, some of you have been through the process before, some of you have not, and think about. So if we came forward with, we can show people what happened in 2008. That's the last time we had such an impact on the economy. We can talk to the assessor about what he's hearing from taxpayers. We can look at what do you think about the idea of looking at peer communities?
Yes,
Does that make sense?
yes.
We would have data, I would look at other towns in Middlesex that look like us from a property value and an income perspective. And we look at, the tax bill, median tax bill as a percentage of per capita income. That's something I can get, so I can bring that forward to you. So we have something that gives us some sense of how we compare to other communities. Does that make sense?
Yes.
What would you look at for those communities, Chris?
What ones do I think? I can
No,
tell
no,
you. the
not,
ones
not
I've already-
communities. What measures in those communities would you
Yeah.
look at?
What I have, which
Sorry?
is what I have. So that what the information that's available to me, Parashar, is sort of what the average assessed value is of the properties, residential. They have the residential properties. They'll tell you what the average tax bill is for property tax. They'll tell you what the median per capita income, and then they take the tax bill divided by that median per capita income, and it's a rate. So they have a rate by town. And so these towns run around somewhere between 10 and 14%, the towns that look like peers to ours.
Okay, so I misunderstood. So this is for the state versus the impact of COVID on revenue.
Yes, this is just
Okay, fair
comparable towns, just to,
Context.
Right.
to
Fair
kind of
enough.
ground us in how do we look versus peer towns.
I got it. Thank you.
Sorry,
Uh,
Chris, that sounds terrific. I just would like to point out you sort of used average and median interchangeably. So I
Oh,
would sort
sorry.
of recommend you use median but otherwise I think.
Yeah, I have to go back on, I wrote down it's average tax bill as a percentage of per capita income, John. That's what the state provides. I'll look to see if they have any, but it's average. It's not median.
You're correct, though. In Concord, the median household tax bill as a percentage of the median family income is about 10% in Concord.
Right,
I
and in the towns that I looked at that were close to us, essentially in the components of that math, it ranges from about 10 to 14%. That's what you would see.
Chris, you have Lois? Lois
Yeah,
has a-
Lois.
Yeah, just one question, just one thought, Chris. When you're thinking about peer communities, I think one difference between Concord and a lot of other communities that we think of as peers has to do with how much revenue, if any, is available from commercial property. So I don't know if that's entering your calculus into how you're picking which towns you see as peers.
Yes.
But there are some towns that, from a residential perspective, are the same, but they have absolutely no commercial base whatsoever.
Yeah, well, just to give you a sense, I absolutely, and you can see that and some of them are also much larger, much smaller, but it comes out. I'm trying to see if I can find my little piece of paper here. Here we go. So the ones to me, at least, and obviously so the towns that look comparable on this tax base, and unfortunately, the most recent data, and Carrie, I don't know why this is, the most recent data for Concord is 2018 on this DOR website. So other towns, and Sudbury has no information at all on, for like 15 years. So Sudbury, I would consider a comp, but I don't have their data. So given that limitation of data, it looks to me like the comps would be Belmont, Lexington, Lincoln, Newton, Wayland, and Wellesley.
Yeah, the only one that I question maybe is Lincoln. And even though it feels comparable, it has such a small commercial existence that it really doesn't have a commercial tax base. And I think that has to do with, that's the reason I wouldn't put Carlisle in there.
Mm-hmm.
Our former town treasurer, Tony LaGalbo, always measured himself against Lexington.
Yeah, that
He thought
feels,
that was the best comparison.
yeah, I think certainly that has to be in the mix. I totally agree.
Did you
So-
say?
What?
Hey, can you repeat that? I didn't hear what you said.
Tony LaGalbo, who was finance director for, I don't know what, 30 some odd years, always used Lexington as his benchmark.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep, they're pretty close to us. Yep.
So Chris, it seems like you and Carrie are doing all the heavy lifting as far as getting all this data. Do you want to ask if other people want to get some for you?
Yes, I do. What a good
I
segue
thought you
there.
did. I thought you did,
It's
yes.
almost like we planned that. That's very good. Hey, John, do you think you can get me some unemployment info off of Pioneer?
Sure.
Or DOR, whichever you like?
Well, so the data, the unemployment that you referenced earlier, Chris, was from Pioneer Institute, and Dean sort of mentioned that they try to adjust for reduction in the workforce, not just, sort of a superficial rate. But yeah, so yes, happy to.
Okay, so that would be good if you can work on that.
Send me an email, Chris, exactly what you'd
I
like to
will.
have, if you would,
I
please.
will. I'll
Yeah.
do that.
Yep.
Who wants to take talking to the assessor's office? We want to know in particular about those programs, the uptake, the trend on the uptake in those programs for deferral.
Well, I think since Kathy is our observer there. Kathy,
Oh, that'd be perfect. Is that good for you, Kathy?
Yep.
All right, good. So
Great.
that would be a good one.
Yeah, I'll just double back with you to make sure I have the appropriate questions.
Yep, that's perfectly fine. And I think, on the 2008 stuff, it sounds like, Carrie, you have that. So that'll be good. We have the information there. I can pull the peer community stuff. And I think that's it. So if anybody comes up with something else, but so just, this is the information we're going to use. So when we come to the meeting, we'll have the information, and to the extent we have revenue estimates earlier, you'll hear about that earlier. But that's what we're going to use. Does that make sense?
It does.
Very happy. Very good.
Yep.
That's all
Great.
for me.
Thank you, Chris. That was great. I wish somebody had done that when I was new to the finance committee. Because I remember the first time I went through the guideline process, I didn't know what was going on. And
Yeah.
I don't think I knew the second time through either, but eventually I got there. So thanks a lot. I think that was great. It helped a
And
lot.
Dean,
Greg.
Mary, I guess somebody's got a question. I'll let
Greg
Greg
does.
go. Greg, you
No,
go.
I was just gonna second that, Chris, because I know coming in last year and going through the process the first time, I was so underwater with everything else
Yeah.
that it's great to see it written down on the paper to see sort of the flow that we're going to take this year. So thank you, and
You're welcome.
the new members, it should hopefully go a little bit easier.
And
Really.
good.
I agree. I third that. I
Oh,
third
good.
that.
And we are going to iterate this. So Mary, do we have a date with the school people? Is
We
that
do. I'll talk about that when I do the chair's remarks.
so? I'm going to present sort of the same thing, I think, through
to the
there.
schools.
So I'll take into account everybody's sort of comments on the outline, and I'll update. And Dean, I'll think about how I describe the revenue process. That's the way the little accountant in me sort of made it work, but that may not be how others think about it. So, all right, great.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
I just have a comment for the new members. If you were joining us last year, we would be deep into this already. We would be at a point of creating the preliminary guideline now. That's where we would be right now. So
We would.
You're getting it.
Yeah, but we would have joined in April.
Yeah, but we don't do anything.
We didn't do anything in the summer. We didn't do anything
going on.
Everything this up. So we're taking advantage of this little extra time to lay
Yes.
some foundation.
You got some time. It's great.
Okay. Let's move on to the next thing on our agenda, which is the verbiage for the guideline delay. The only reason I'm bringing this to the committee is because the verbiage that I've written here pretty much commits us to submitting an article to the warrant for the town meeting. We already voted on the guideline calendar, so technically I didn't have to bring this, but I did want to because I want you to agree with the fact that we're committing to bringing this as a change to the deadline for the publishing of the guideline. We're intending to have a warrant article. And Carrie pointed out something to me. Carrie, you want to share with what you pointed out to me?
Sure, about the approximately.
Yes, at the end.
Yeah, so the, right, so the commitment potentially is to bring forward a warrant article tying the guidelines process to town meeting rather than just a date on the calendar, so that a town meeting moves, the guideline deadlines automatically move. And I just noticed it says approximately that you would have a guideline published approximately 5 weeks before the close of the warrant. And I didn't know how comfortable committee members felt with approximately, since you are the finance committee, you're numbers people. We don't like the word approximately. So.
Well, this doesn't, no, just be clear. This doesn't commit us to anything as far as the wording of the actual article. And I will work with Carmen, who's agreed to work with me to actually word the article. But it does set an intention that we will have an article on the warrant. So it doesn't specify the language. Again, it commits us to an intention. Lois, did you have something?
Yeah, I think there's two ways to approach this. You can either be vaguer about it, not put in a time window, and just say that we'll submit an article that sets the date for publishing the guideline, that ties the required date for publishing the guideline to the date set for town meeting. And then you've got the concept without the limitation.
Yep.
If you want to be more specific,
No,
then I would suggest taking the quotes
no.
out, because that implies that this is what you intend to put in, and replace approximately with something like not less than.
No, I
So-
like, we don't want to be more specific. We want to be.
Then just
So your first
put
thing,
forward the concept, and that gives you and Carmen and the rest of us the ability to craft the actual language
Exactly.
of the article based partly on the experience we have now doing this.
exactly.
I agree. You definitely want to leave yourself a little wiggle room, because you don't know what circumstances are going to arise.
Yep.
So the way I read the first paragraph, it seemed like the date was originally set to when the warrant closed.
Exactly.
So why don't we just repeat that again versus tying it to town meeting?
Because in order to submit an article, it has to be vetted by town council. And so, in other words, I don't want to get into the language of the article here. I really want to just say, just as we said before, just an intention. We're having, and we can even take that out entirely and just say, we don't even have to say we have an intention. We can take that out entirely and just say, we're blowing by the November 30th guideline date because we have a really good reason. So I think that's what's really in front of the committee tonight. Do
Right.
we want to articulate in this verbiage an intention or not?
I think it might be helpful to do the intent that we intend to submit an article to change future timeline.
That doesn't have any bearing on this year's, right? That's all next year to deal with, or at town meeting, right? It doesn't have a bearing on this date that we're
Oh,
setting
it
this
does.
letter for.
No,
it
but it's
does.
kind of nice
No,
just to
no.
give a preview of where we're headed in our thinking. That's all.
Yes.
I think as long as we're non-specific enough about what the article includes, because is there any chance we won't do it? Because if we don't do it, we default back to November 30th, which means if we have some other dislocation in our schedules, then we're back where we are now, having to have the select board give us an extension. So,
No, we will probably, I mean, this is the second year actually that we haven't published a guideline on November 30th.
then I'm inclined to include a version of that very last sentence, but very general.
Yep.
Yeah.
Other people, what are other people's thoughts?
I think we, it's when we miss the deadline, but we have an intention to keep to a schedule related to the guideline. And I think we
Yes.
should telegraph that.
Exactly. Other people, Dean, I know you had a thought on this. You're muted.
My only thought here is that this has historically been problematic for the schools. They are just, let's say we go back to normal, which we all hope we will, and we return to closing the warrant really the very first week of January. And then you back up far enough, 5 weeks, you're still back to November 30th or somewhere around there. The schools have a very difficult time. They have not had a lot of understanding of how their budget for the fiscal year that they're in is operating. And then they're forced to make a budget for the next fiscal year. So they've been pushing us for the last 2 years beyond November 30th. And so that's been problematic. And so I think what I would almost say 4 weeks. So right now let's leave it non-specific.
Okay.
And because this year there's going to be they're going to have a lot of time to see how their budget is behaving between now and when we're heading into town meeting. So they'll have plenty of time. But in a normal year, school starts after Labor Day, and then, boom, they have to have budgets that they're starting to hand us. It's a lot on them. So it's
okay. So this is the discussion we'll have when we're ready to actually craft the article itself.
I absolutely agree. We should say we intend to do this. We
Okay.
should say we intend to do this.
Okay. Any other comments? Can I have a motion then that we publish this?
Sorry, Mary, I had a comment.
Yeah, go ahead.
And so the second paragraph, I was wondering if we could potentially delete a lot of the phrases to just make it a much more straightforward statement. So for example, I might suggest, I think everything is in here, but for some people it could be a little overwhelming. So I thought it could read, this year, the select board voted to defer the 2021 town meeting date until June 13th and close the warrant on March 26th. Finance Committee therefore voted to delay publishing the budget guideline until February 26th, 2021, which would provide for approximately 5 weeks between the guidelines and the warrant. And I'd just leave it at that.
Well, I'm not sure that's, to me, I'm not sure that's clear, actually. So what's your goal here? Tell me again.
Again, obviously for me, it seemed that we were making a change in the date of publishing our guidelines.
Yep.
Due to the fact that the town has changed the date of the warrant.
That's right. That's correct.
And the change of our date coincides with theirs by a difference of 5 weeks, which is what you stated in the previous paragraph.
Right.
So that's all I would, again, I was taking out the phrase due to COVID, advice of town moderator, in order to give the schools time. I was just taking out additional phrases.
I think those inform people as far as why we were doing what we're doing.
Well, we are by saying that we're saying the select board moved the close of the warrant, and therefore we've moved the date of our
Okay, so we're following the select board instead of making our choice based on COVID is what you're.
I'm just saying, I'm saying this year, the select board voted to defer the town meeting to this date and the warrant to that date, and the finance committee therefore voted to delay publishing the guidelines.
Yep, I see what you're saying. Yep, I get what you're trying to say now, I think.
So just trying to say, this happened, this happened, this happened.
Okay, so, right, and so what I'm hearing you say is that this really makes it sound like we're following the lead of the select board rather than we decided because of COVID and talking to the moderator.
Because we want to make it easier for the schools and, we all know all of that came into play, but just for, again, I thought the purpose of this agenda item was you wanted comments on the language, and I thought that just kind of crisped it up. That's my opinion.
Okay, what do other people think?
Take or leave it.
I think tightening the language is a good idea.
Okay,
I agree.
okay.
I think it leaves out, though, the November 30th, that we know I mean, town meeting, it's
Well,
a,
it says it in the prior paragraph.
yeah, it does, but it doesn't say that we're gonna now respond to that going forward.
Well, it does if you
We're
leave the last sentence in.
That,
If you leave the edited last sentence in, it does. If you take out, you could take out furthermore and just say, at the June 21st town meeting, Finance Committee will submit an article to fix the date for publishing the guidelines, to tie the date for publishing the guidelines into the date that the warrant closes each year.
That's okay with me, as long as that's in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
That
agree.
would still be there. But I think these are good changes. It tightens it up and, it makes it clear that we were doing what the select board basically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I feel good about. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you need a motion, Mary, or are you just going to go do this?
Well, I need a motion to approve that publishing this with the intention. I'd like to have a motion that we agree that we're publishing it with the intention of having an article at the next town meeting.
Make a motion that we publish the amended 2 paragraphs with noting that with the intention that we're going to change future guideline dates.
Do I have a second?
I second.
Second.
Thank
A
you.
discussion?
Okay.
We aren't really voting on any actual language, so why don't we have a motion that gives Mary the right to make the final edits or something, because the language has been all over the place in the conversation. So why doesn't the motion say we're authorizing Mary to make final edits or something like that, as long as she includes the intentionality? How about that?
I second that motion.
Oh, then I guess I'm amending the initial motion. How about that?
Second the amending.
No, we have to do this officially. So Parashar, will you withdraw your original motion?
I will withdraw my motion.
Thank
Oh,
you.
okay,
Now, Dean, will
if
you
that's
make,
withdrawn, then I will move that
Yes.
we authorize the chair to make final edits on the statement with the intention clause included.
Second.
good. I'm going to go around and take a quick roll call. Lois,
Yes.
myself, Mary, yes. Kathy,
Yes.
Dean,
Yes,
Dean,
Oh, Dean, yes. I thought D and Dean, it's two.
I know. Chris,
Yes.
Andrea,
Yes.
Greg,
Yes, have one question after this.
Dick,
Yes.
Wade,
Yes.
Brian,
Yes.
Parashar,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Phil.
Yes.
Great, thank you. Your question, Greg,
What does publish mean?
we're going to put it on the website.
Okay,
Technically, we were supposed to put it in the paper, but we decided the website would be.
okay, that's all I want to know is
I
where,
shouldn't
like,
have said that. I didn't say that.
Now the website is
Where's
public.
the rewind?
so now we don't know where it's going.
Being published.
It's going to be published and
It's gonna
people
be
will read
published.
it. People who care will read it. Okay, next item is Chair's report. I'll make my comments brief. The Select Board has spent several meetings and I think a lot of time putting together their 2020-2021 Select Board goals. I'd like to share with you, not all of their goals, it's 3.5 pages, but I would like to share with you the financial part of their goals. Okay, so the first thing they wrote was under financial stability, under values and guiding principles, financial stability, fiscal responsibility, and financial stability, sustainability. And then under goals and objectives, these are published on the website, by the way. You can go to the website and look at under the Select Board and all their goals are listed, but I just wanted to highlight for us tonight the goals that relate to the finance. So under financial stability, 1, instill integrated fiscal policies among the select board, the finance committee, and the school committee to manage the tax burden on Concord citizens. Number 2, support management of town services and budgets to maintain Concord's AAA bond rating and to avoid Proposition 2.5 overrides. Number 3, encourage the capital planning task force to develop a more effective long-term method for understanding and prioritizing the capital and facility needs of the town and the schools to include timetables, cost estimates, and environmental impacts. So I found that encouraging as far as pretty much supporting the recommendations that we're making to the capital planning task force. Before we leave that though, I do want to say that even though we certainly should be aware of the select board goals, and when ours align with them, that's always a nice place to be. But I also want to let everybody know that the finance committee is an independent committee. So sometimes we disagree with the select board. We're an appointed committee, and we have the right to do so. The second thing I wanted to mention in my chair's report is, Chris mentioned this earlier, which is we're planning a joint meeting between the finance committees of both the town of Concord and the town of Carlisle and the school committee, the high school committee. That meeting is scheduled for December 8th. And the purpose of that meeting is to get all the boards on board as far as the budget process. So we're not going to be looking at FY22, the FY22 budget in particular or in detail. We're really just trying to lay out the process as Chris did for us tonight. And the other thing I would like to do at that meeting is to get people familiar with some of the terminology that always trips people up. What's circuit breaker? What's OPEB? What's E&D? So I think this will be helpful for, certainly for the new members. I think it will be helpful for me because when we go through the guideline process, I often get tripped up on some of the terminology and then I can't follow along. So we're hoping that we get some kind of a grounding between the boards. So this isn't really, I don't envision this as a policy meeting, and I don't envision it as a FY22 meeting. It's more of, again, we're taking this opportunity to kind of educate people and get people grounded on what's the process and what is some of the terminology. So again, it's December 8th. I don't know where it is going to be yet, but I would encourage everyone, if you can, to attend that.
Will that be a Zoom, Mary?
I'm sorry, yes, it would have to be a Zoom.
Would that be a 7 o'clock Zoom? Would your
I think it's 7:30, but I'll let you know. Court Booth is really the person who's coordinating this whole thing, and I'll let you know as soon as I do. Dean.
Do we have any early indication as to what the town meeting schedule will be for Carlisle? Because those things need to dovetail with the high school.
I don't.
We don't.
I don't, and hopefully that
Carrie,
will.
do you have any? Is Carrie on the? I don't see her on the call.
Carrie, do you have?
No, I don't either, but I certainly can send out an email over to the staff in Carlisle and ask.
Okay,
December
December 8th.
Be on the back foot like 3 months after they do it in April or something, whatever.
I hadn't thought of that, but that would be a great thing to put on the agenda for this, to kind of how do we integrate these different calendars as far as, especially, well, it's for the high school. You're right. Good. Thank you for that. I'll try to remember to get that out to Court. And then the last thing I have in my chair's report is that Carrie and I have agreed to work on revising the Finance Committee report. We're looking at the outline, and I'm wondering if there's anybody on the Finance Committee right now that thinks they have a light observer load and would be willing to help us work on that. I would appreciate you stepping up. Let me know. The Finance Committee report is a great document. It has a lot of information in it. I think if we organized it a little differently, it might be more effective.
Mary, I'll volunteer to do that.
Great.
Okay, it'll actually help me learn more as I'm going into it. I don't know, I won't be substantively helpful because I don't have the experience, but from a drafting perspective, I'll be useful.
That might be really good. Just, it's fresh eyes to look at it because
Yeah, okay.
we understand what sometimes we understand what we're reading. Okay, so it'd be really good to have a new, fresh set of eyes. So I
Okay.
appreciate that. Thank
Yeah,
you.
I'll volunteer to help with that.
Thank you, Lois. Okay, great. That's pretty much all I have for now. Let's do the observer reports if we can.
Can I make one comment before we
Sure.
move on to that?
Sure, go ahead.
Since you were just asking for a volunteer to help you with a task, there's another task that the committee does every year that I've been doing. And I can happily continue to do it, but it's going to need to be turned over, and that's the 5-year tax plan modeling that gets done. It was extensively revised this year to use, Monte Carlo analysis, which whether that helped or not, I'm not entirely sure, but it was something we could do.
Cool.
And anyone who is facile with Excel would be much appreciated, because it's going to need to, I'm not on the committee forever, so I'm happy to turn it over and just have somebody help out. Don't all volunteer at once.
I saw Greg's hand go up. Greg.
Yeah, Tina, I'll be happy to learn how it was done and stuff. It might be good actually to get more than one person, but I'll be happy to take a stab at it with you if you want to shoot it over, and I can take a look at it.
That'd be great. Quite frankly, I got this in a 2-person turnover, and now I've been doing it myself for like 3 years by myself, and we'll do a 2-person for a couple of years, and then you'll be on your way, and you'll have to find another victim. So it's not managing a spreadsheet is often a single person thing. It's not like you need a lot of hands in there, but it's good to have a sounding board, especially when you're making revisions, and so thanks, Greg. Appreciate the volunteer. Yep.
You might decide that you want to start a new model. I mean, models get, they get frayed at the edges.
They get creaky. They
get frayed, and then you might want to start with a whole new
just a nice straight line that's no computation whatsoever.
Exactly.
Sure.
I think it goes up by 5 to 6%.
Yeah, you just draw your line and then plot your points. That's the way it usually works, right?
I do have a 3D CAD background, so it kind of fits in there.
Okay, great. Thank you. That was good.
Thank you. That's
get
great.
some other people involved. Thank you for that. Okay, observer reports. I'm going to look at the screen the way I see it. Lois, do you have anything to report?
Yes, I do.
Great.
I went to the Minuteman Regional High School. I zoomed into the Minuteman Regional High School committee meeting on October 13th. I want to really thank Chris, who spent some time with me in advance of the call so that I had some background. Otherwise, it would have been like watching a film in a foreign language with badly translated subtitles. But our conversation really helped me, I think, follow most of it. The part of the meeting I attended lasted about an hour. Then they went into an executive session to discuss, I gather, a pending dispute or litigation. And so I was not in the room for that discussion. The discussion I was there for was mostly not relevant to anything involving the town of Concord or finance. It was mostly about the nuts and bolts of getting the school moving again in a COVID environment. The one thing that came up that I thought was relevant for us was that Minuteman Regional is going to be requesting, may have already requested, depending upon the timing of when they were reaching out, that each of the municipalities that are represented as part of the region provide funding to Minuteman to defray costs that Minuteman has incurred related to coronavirus. The reason for that is that there was coronavirus relief, I gather from the discussion at this meeting, done at the state level, but regional schools were left out. So the funding went to schools within towns, but Minuteman was not included in that funding. So they were going to approach they were hoping that oversight will be corrected in future aid packages, but they were planning on bringing that issue up at a town managers meeting schedule to take place. I think it would probably already have taken place. one town, Lancaster, has already agreed to provide the funding. And Acton has indicated a willingness to do that. What they did not talk about was what they were talking about in terms of an amount of money. But the idea was that this reimbursement to them of costs, of some portion of the costs they incurred getting ready for COVID, would be made from monies that were allocated to towns underneath the relief legislation. And I may have said this, but they did say they know there's no mechanism for forcing the towns. They were going to ask the towns if they'd be willing to make the contribution. But this was just something that they saw as an oversight in the legislation that they wanted to correct on an ad hoc basis now, in the hopes that next time they'll remember to raise their hands and make sure that they get a piece of whatever comes if there is another package. So that was really the only thing that seemed relevant to us. And again, I didn't get any sense of what the scale of the request would be. But I assume this is already working its way through channels, probably through the town, at the town manager level. And the next meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, November 17th, and I do expect to be able to call into that meeting too. I haven't reached out to the police and fire yet, since public safety is also in my remit, but I will try and do that before our next regular meeting.
Great, thank you. Carrie, do you know anything about a request from Minuteman for money from the town? Carrie stepped out.
It was very specifically tied to PPE and relief that had gone to the schools, or the two towns under relief legislation that that Minuteman was left out of.
Yep.
My recollection of that was that schools were given allocated funds on a per capita basis, like how many students they had in the system.
Mm-hmm.
So if one of our students happens to attend Minuteman, it's not clear whether that student gets counted in the allocation or not, but apparently not. And somehow we're going to have to figure out how to get them the money.
Yeah, well, they were pursuing it, but they weren't pursuing it through a FinCom channel.
Thank you. Carrie, do you know anything about that?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question? You caught me stepping away for a break.
I'm sorry. This was an issue that came up at the Minuteman Regional High School meeting.
Yes.
And it had to do with funding for PPE and the fact that they didn't. Yeah, so you know about this already?
Right, so they have made a supplemental request, I think through the area town managers, for some additional funding. And I'm not sure what the disposition is yet. I assume that we'll figure out how to pay for that.
Lois, were all the regional schools in Massachusetts affected by this, or is this just Minuteman?
The impression I got from the discussion was that they weren't the only regional school affected by this. But I don't know what I assume that Concord Carlisle was not left out of the package, the high school. So I don't know whether or not it had to do with the nature of Minuteman as a regional school.
And this is a state package.
Yes.
Okay, thank
So
you.
Carrie, do you know how much money this is? And
My recollection is something around $50,000. I've only heard of it in passing. In speaking to the town manager, I know he was still working on the issue and I believe attended a meeting recently. But
okay.
I think it was in the neighborhood of $50,000.
And Carrie, just in case you missed that part of the report, one of the things they talked about was that the town of Lancaster has already agreed to provide the funding and Acton has indicated a willingness to do so. This was as of their meeting October 13th.
Is the 50K Concord share or total?
Concord share, must be Concord
I
share.
believe, my understanding was that was Concord share.
How many students do we have at Minuteman? Do you know, Lois? It sounds like a pop quiz. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it is a pop quiz. Not more than you would think.
29.
But okay. Carrie knows. Thank you.
Okay, the town manager will probably let us know this when he's reviewing his FY21 spending when we do the guideline process. So this is a good heads up. Thank you. Thank you, Lois. Good heads up. Do you have anything else?
That's all I had.
Thank you. Kathy?
Make sure I unmute myself. Yes, I attended the meeting of the retirement board. It was a good start for me. They had one of the portfolio managers, as you are probably well aware, the assets held for the retirement fund are appropriately diversified across multiple investment managers. And so at this month's meeting, they had one of the investment managers discussing the performance of their sleeve of the portfolio. I particularly found it interesting as it is one of the areas that I spend time in. And there was a discussion of value investing versus growth, which value has been out of favor in the last 5 years, but is expected to turn around. So it was a good meeting, and all seems well. Besides the portfolio manager's review, there was the review by the town of new hires, retirements, and transfers. So that's it for my first retirement board meeting. The second meeting that I attended was my first with the Board of Assessors. And I believe, Carrie, you were also part of that?
No, I was at the retirement board meeting, but not the.
Okay, all right, I'm sorry, then I knew you were at one of my meetings. The Board of Assessors meeting that I attended did review and approve 3 categories of real estate here in the town: farmland, recreational, and conservation. And all 3 categories are allowed variances to the overall tax rate, and they were reviewed. And as you know, many of them looked, like the areas of the town that we all know, like Verrill and Matheson Field, and et cetera, et cetera. So that was the review that occurred at this assessors meeting. Interestingly, there was not any discussion that I heard about any issues with property tax collections. The area that was reviewed in a little bit more depth was how was the excise tax rolls going along, and that seemed fine. And I did, Mary, communicate to you that it appears to me, and I don't know, is anybody else here on the committee, has anybody else ever been observer to the assessors?
John was, weren't you, John?
Yeah, I did it a number of years ago as well.
Oh, Dick did too.
So it appeared to me that the substance of the committee, and that is reviewing assessments of properties, was done in executive session. And I was asked to leave the meeting for the executive session.
The only time I remember that happening was when they were discussing particularly the properties of particular owners, where they were going to talk about perhaps some personal information.
Okay.
Well,
But
that's-
they review abatements, the abatement applications in executive session.
Who's speaking?
Carrie,
Oh, they review what?
abatement applications in executive session.
And so that's standard operating procedure, because it looked like from the minutes I looked at that are on the website that they do this every meeting. They go into executive session.
So at this, Well, at certain times of the year, when they're reviewing abatement applications, they will regularly have executive sessions.
Okay.
Now, my experience as an observer has been that whenever a committee goes into executive session, I'm asked to leave. And I think, has anyone else has anyone else ever stayed for executive sessions?
No, they were having them at the Department of Public Works about Nagog Pond, and I never stayed for those.
Right.
Okay.
So
And I didn't know, my experience is in corporate governance, and when a board goes into executive session in a corporate setting, they usually ask management to leave. So I wasn't familiar with how the observer's role is perceived versus management versus being part of the overseers of the town. So I guess I would have thought that a member of the finance committee would be considered as an overseer of the town and
No.
could be given privy to sort of what goes into a discussion about, waiving taxes. But if that's
I think the desire to protect the
individual
of the people being reviewed or the employee being reviewed overrides that.
okay,
At least that's been my experience.
okay, that's all I have to report.
Yeah.
And thank you all for helping me understand the role of observer.
Okay,
That's it.
Thank you, Kathy. Dean?
I have two committees I'm responsible for. The middle school building committee is still paused, so they have not started back up. Greg might be able to tell me when they're going to start back up if he has any idea.
No comment.
And the other one I have is the Climate Action Advisory Board. Climate Action Advisory Board met on October 21st. They are in the process of redefining their new charter. They completed their mission of creating a climate action plan for the town, and that was done within the last fiscal year. And now they're trying to figure out, what do we focus on? What are we going to do? Can we work on specific items? Can we push through specific elements of our plan? How does that become administered? So the meeting was really all over the place from my perspective, as they tried to struggle with the new world that they're now in, which is, we have a plan. What are we going to do with what we have? One of the highest priorities for that was an initiative called the Rmi Accelerator Program. Now, RMI is the Rocky Mountain Institute. From what I can tell, it was always referred to in the meeting as through shorthand. So I think I looked it up, and I think that's what this is. But basically what this program is doing is it's collaborating along numerous towns within the state of Massachusetts to try to bring the built environment forward so that it is much more energy efficient. And towns are constrained. They cannot create, planning board cannot create any kind of bylaw that says you must build an electric house, or it must be, this is the new building code. So to get something like that achieved, you need to go to the legislature and ask for special legislation so that you have local control over certain things. The RMI Accelerator is a program that's trying to bring over 20 towns together to push for special legislation to move our built environment codes into local control so we can push for more electrification, et cetera. Doesn't really affect us. There are multiple prongs that might affect us. They are looking at the built environment of the town's infrastructure. How do we electrify our buildings, our transportation? How do we electrify that? But the meeting really didn't get any further along in terms of how they actually go forward with either of those things. So there you go, not too much. Right now, the financial overhang here is high because the amount of money that it could cost to electrify our buildings or electrify our fleet of vehicles is not insignificant. But that they're right at the moment, they're mostly focused on this initiative to try to have multiple towns push the legislature to give us control over our ability to get residences electrified, become more energy efficient. So that's their focus for the moment.
Good, good.
That's our-
You're right. The financial overhang here is high. So I'm glad you're paying attention. But good, thank you. Chris, do you have anything else that you want to add or?
Yeah, so CPC
Oh, yes.
is in there. That's the community preservation group. And so they are funded via a special tax that you pay in the town. It's a little layer on top of your property tax that goes to fund this. Carrie, they still don't have a number for, am I right that they don't have a number yet for what they can distribute?
They don't. I usually give it to them at the beginning of November.
Okay.
And I'm working on that now and probably will have it to them tomorrow.
Okay, all right. So there isn't a, I know Mary, you asked me that last time, they don't yet have the number for what they can spend, but they do have their applications in. So that the application process is underway. So they have, I don't know, 10 or so applicants projects, and they're in the process of interviewing the applicants and going through the project. So is a kind of two flavors of projects this year. Some that are new, sort of standalone preservation or open space type projects, and others that are, as we would recognize them, funding that's been requested for projects that are really larger projects where they are getting a component of their funding through CPC. So the ones in that bucket would be White Pond. So they're asking for $300,000 to help support White Pond beach improvements. And the other one like that is the Warner's Pond dredging. So, and these are not the first times CPC has contributed to these efforts. So they've had prior grants to these projects earlier. So Warner's Pond dredging, they're asking for $250,000. In the other bucket, so the standalone historical preservation type projects is the Wright Tavern, which is a $500,000 request from CPC out of about an $800,000 project. So that one, and that one is also on property that's owned by the church. So we may have that same discussion that we had last year, the clock tower, on any legal concerns around essentially tax dollars funding property that belongs to a religious organization. So that one is on their radar. On the one other one, Mary, and this one was reviewed last night and I was surprised by it, but perhaps I shouldn't have been. So the affordable housing people were there and they have come in for $500,000. And I guess I was sort of surprised by that because of course we've just voted in town meeting for $500,000 out of free cash for affordable housing, but that trust where that money is going to go is just being formulated now. The trustees have not yet been appointed. Their process for granting monies is not, there's no trustees, so there's no process yet. So the affordable, the folks who are looking for this grant have sort of said, well, I need to get money before that committee is formed. So we're coming to CPC to make sure we have money in our back pocket, if you will, to the extent that a project comes up. But they also described that they weren't sure because the trustees have not been appointed, their processes have not been determined as to what the mandate will be for the granting out of that new trust. And this is the request that they have is very specific to some condos where they believe the deeds, the restrictions will either be lapsing or there's going to be an opportunity to purchase these condos in two properties that they speaking of. So I think they have some very specific ideas for properties that may come up that they may want to purchase, and that's what they have come to CPC for. But there was some discussion of, well, gee, you
Yes,
know,
yes.
it seems like we're
Yeah,
asking
yeah.
for the same
Well, you
money.
know, I was going to ask you a question, a broader question about, are they integrating their requests with requests that are coming through the town's municipal capital plan? And this is in that same kind of vein.
Yeah,
The first $500,000 that we approved, not this past town meeting, but the year
right,
before,
right,
was
right,
under the discretion to be spent by the town manager, I thought.
right, that's correct. And it
so
has been. So I think
it's
if they,
gone?
well, no, it's not gone. No.
Okay,
So I
okay.
think between the, I think they've spent, if I have it right, I think they said they had spent about 700,000, and there's another 300,000 or 400,000 that remains. So there is some money that was spent
Yep.
on buying 1 or 2 homes, and you know, getting the difference, I guess, subsidizing the difference between what market value would have been and what
Right. Yep.
they want to sell it at the affordable level for. So yeah, that was, so I asked a few questions, and I think some other people were going to ask some questions. So it does seem to be timing a little bit of folks trying to figure out, well, you know, the CPC's process starts now, whereas they're not sure when this new trust is formed, where now the latest approval or the latest approved funding will be deposited. So they weren't sure when they could apply for that. I guess that was, it seemed to me that was the discussion, but there's actually maybe a little broader discussion as, is that going to be their main source, the town funding?
Right,
You
exactly.
know, or are they going to keep coming to the CPC? So that was a little bit of the discussion there. So that
Yep.
one, we got to stay
Yep.
tuned on that one.
Good.
Those are the large ones. So Wright Tavern for $500,000, White Pond for 300,000, Warner's Pond dredging for 250, affordable housing for $500,000. There's also the purchase of a conservation restriction on some property that's next to Emerson, the Emerson House across from the museum. So that family has granted a lot of property to the town, and they are looking to raise some money for their endowment. But rather than sell us the property, we're going to get a conservation restriction. So it means it cannot be developed. So they've asked for 210,000 out of about a $600,000 project on the Emerson Conservation. There's also an independent project called the Timothy Wheeler House, which is a farm from, I think, the 1800s that has a fair amount of property. It's owned by the town, but it sounds like there has not been a plan put in place as to how it might be used to further the historical education in the town, or some sort of a perhaps recreation of a farm from the 1800s. So they haven't really they don't have a vision for the property. We own it, we lease it. So there are people living in the home.
Mhm.
So they want to go back to that, and they're asking for money to do a design. And we can talk some more about that, but that's where they are. But they don't yet have they'll have soon, I guess, the total number that they can actually spend. When this, if you add up the requests, it's probably between 2 and 2.5 million.
The independent projects, I think the CPC has a really good process to understand how much money they need and what the money is going to be spent on. It's the projects that are, bridged between the CPC and the town that I think sometimes we don't really know. We're not clear on what the money is actually going to be spent on and how much money is coming from each other, so it's kind of done in a silo, and we worked last year really hard to try to get those integrated.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think the challenge is, and I think it's a challenge for that committee as well, and for the presenters, because really, it's really single projects that have multiple funding sources, but you hear about them in different pieces.
Right.
We hear about them through the capital project budget, and then we hear about them through the CPC request. I think we have to look at them as single projects. So I will work to dot that I for us as we go through this. So we're not looking at it in two places. These
Great.
ones are half funded by the town half funded by elsewhere.
And also being clear on exactly what the money is going to be spent for.
Yeah,
Because
well,
when I
that,
hear-
that,
when
yeah,
I hear
that seems
beach
to be
improvements for White Pond, I thought we already paid for that.
Yeah, we
But maybe
did.
I'm
Well,
wrong, maybe I'm wrong.
Well, you saw, we had correspondence. I think the committee would have seen that we
We'll
had. some
talk about that. We'll
Yeah.
talk about that at the end. Dean,
Okay.
did you have your hand?
Just a couple comments on the CPC's items.
Yep.
Number one, the Wheeler House has been back multiple times, multiple years. I'm not Wheeler House, the Wright Tavern.
Oh, the tavern.
But
Okay.
it is not a public access building. They rent out spaces for people to, like, architects and other people have offices in there. So we're effectively funding not just a religious thing, but basically a private thing. I hope they're asking for money for the facades and the outside of it, which is what the public can see.
Yeah.
Number two,
Go ahead.
Timothy Wheeler House is on Walden Street, about 2 blocks down from the intersection with Main. So as you're heading out of town on Walden, Timothy Wheeler House is a congregate living place for older people, and it's very elegant and looks great.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm glad you said that. I have, that's the, did I give you the wrong name? So it's the Emerson. Timothy Wheeler is on the list. That's about 185,000.
Okay.
But the farm, did I give you the wrong name of that?
Was it Harrington House?
It's Harrington.
It's,
Harrington.
yeah,
It's Harrington
I'm
House.
sorry. I think I gave you the wrong
Yeah,
name.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Harrington House is the one I think you're talking about.
You're right. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
That's an absolute gem, and I think it's managed by, like, the Historical Commission or something. I've forgotten who manages that. It is a gem. It is old and nothing's been changed in there. It's fantastic.
You're talking
they've
about.
come,
Timothy
they've come
Wheeler.
before the CPC before.
They
though,
have, yeah.
And they
Wait,
have received money.
Wait, stop for a second. Are we talking about Timothy Wheeler or are we talking about the Harrington House?
Harrington is the
Harrington.
one I said is a gem. It's a really old house that has a couple living in it. They leased it out.
It's really bad inside.
It's bad, but it's old. It's really old and
It's
original.
really bad. But
Oh,
anyway,
you wanna go to
okay,
basement
we'll
and
talk
look-
about this later once Chris gets the final list and the committee has done its work to kind of,
Yep.
scrub it
That's
up.
my two comments.
Scrub it
Wheeler
clean.
House is on me.
Thank you.
Is on Walden and
Harrington's on Harrington.
oh, the last thing I want to mention is
Go ahead.
that there is a 10% need to hand out 10% to affordable housing. So they have every right to come and ask
Yeah.
for money because they have to allocate 10% of the funds minimum to affordable housing. So
Good
there's going to be
point.
money there. They might as well ask for it.
Okay, Andrea.
There was a meeting with the Council on Aging. They've had a tough time because the Harvey Wheeler building does not lend itself to COVID standards. They just opened the building to staff only, Monday to Thursday. There's been a lot of requests from the seniors to be allowed to use computers, and they just can't work it. So what they've expanded drive-through meals in the parking lot to twice a week. And that's a social event for seniors to get out and pick up meals. They've also done a flu clinic, drive-through flu clinic. Hired two more outreach workers, trying to identify problems with isolation, and they've expanded. They're working on expanding more of the Zoom activities and to get seniors involved, different exercise, quilting, and whatever may be of interest. But it's a struggle. And there's, just working on it. But they will, for a while, it seemed as though there was going to be a problem even getting meetings scheduled, but it looks like it's going to be on a monthly basis going forward.
Thank you, Andrea. Dee, what's happening with the schools?
Yeah, the schools. On Tuesday night, there was a lengthy meeting, and it was an important meeting from a budget standpoint because the documents and the information that was provided showed the close of FY20 and then what's happening in FY21. So I'm just going to read you some of the highlights of that. But
Great.
if you're interested in looking at the documents, the easiest way to access them would be to go to the agenda for the meeting and click on that. And then all of the documents are available to click through from the agenda item or from the agenda document.
Great.
Okay, so, and the revolving fund documents that they did describe and discuss at the meeting have still to be posted, and I haven't seen those yet. So I'm primarily talking about the end of the year for both. I'll talk about CPS first. And the notable information that I found from the meeting or plan to describe tonight, they had notable adjustments included, and this is from the closing out of FY20, $104,465 in administrative savings, and for a little under $446,000 in maintenance savings due to the virus. So that was a little bit of a surprise, that much in a 4-month period for maintenance. But it was a pleasant surprise. So some of the money, $262,000, was added to the circuit breaker account. And the circuit breaker account is the 9000 series of DESI, which it's probably Greek to a couple of you. It was Greek to me until about last year. Those are programs with other districts. So it can be placements for students that go, it can be charter schools, it can be, they had about 4 different categories, or students coming into the district. So that was $262,000 went there added to the circuit breaker. And the important thing is that the circuit breaker account at CPS is now fully funded. So it's going into FY21. So it's $1 million plus somehow. But I didn't have the detail on the exact number on that. I'm not going to talk about that. The 2 significant adjustments that I found were more than $400,000 each was moved into the school leadership account. And that was due to the elevation of 3 new assistant principals, and also paraprofessional tutors due to the virus. And they, and paraprofessionals was also another $400,000. Now, the one thing that they did not do, they did not prepay any tuitions for FY21 for CPS. And then that's closing out fiscal year 20. And in fiscal year 21 in the budget, what I noticed is they had significant adjustments included in negative $730,000 in the classroom teaching category due to retirements and other needs, and which was partially offset with an increase of $447,000 for short-term substitute teachers and paraprofessionals, plus an increase of $119,331 for medical and therapeutic services. So that was noteworthy, I thought, in their FY21 budget. And then the interesting part is, so much of the money is already allocated at the beginning of the year. So of the 40,777, of the $40,770,193 approved budget, what they have remaining is $3,351,222. That's the CPS. And then a couple of points on, this is the regional high school. They had the same documents, the final month 1,000 level DESI report, which they do get on a monthly basis, the 1,000 level. On the 100 level basis, they only get the quarterly reports. So at the close of the year, there was a remaining balance of $67,993.89 from the appropriated budget, which went into E&D, which is the excess and deficiencies account that we talked about earlier tonight. And as of June 30th, 2020, the estimated E&D account is $1,714,602, which equates to 4.99%. And the maximum allowed to have in an E&D account is 5%. So Jared Stanton, the finance director, was ecstatic that he he almost got to his 5%. But it was very pleasing to them because they felt that that amount of money is going to be useful in the next 2 to 3 years. That's how they were playing that. The circuit breaker also is maxed out. So they had of the, with the, when they have a remaining balance, they want to do something with the money. And they have to do something with the money. So it went into maxing out the E&D account as well as the circuit breaker. Tuitions were paid in advance for FY21 because that's where they could put the extra money after maxing out the other two. And fourthly, of the of note, there was a reduction in fixed costs of $390,000 due to tightening up. And I went down and looked into the 100 level, and it was primarily the insurance accounts. So that's interesting information. And then in the FY21 budget, they have in there, let me just see. Okay, they have the remaining balance for their budget is $9,899,155 based on a almost $35 million budget.
Dee, can I interrupt you for a minute?
Yeah.
When you say that for their FY21 budget, they have 989, does that mean looking
9 million. Did I say
No, you said that. So you're saying that's how much they have to spend through the end of the year?
That's correct.
Okay.
As I mentioned in the CP.
How do they think they're going to do relative to budget?
They think they're in fine shape.
Okay.
That was the same, they had even less than that for
okay, that's all.
CPS.
Okay, fine.
Okay. And he said that he thought that they were in good shape regarding assessments versus revenues at all. He also mentioned that money allocated under the CARES Act, now we're talking about the region, was $297,000, which must be spent by 12/30/2022. And to date, they've spent $210,000, and the remaining amount is $87,650. And they're on track for spending that. And he said that this is a separate account. This is all put in a separate account, and that will be audited at the end of the program, at the end of the year. So I think, Carrie, that kind of confirms everything you were saying earlier about, they have to spend it before the end of the year and things like that. Now that this was like information overload for the school committee and for me. And what they, at the November 10th meeting, they're going to talk more about the budgets and the numbers and more questions, just so that everybody is satisfied with the information that they received. And that's it.
So can I just say that it looks like they're in good shape, right, relative to their FY20?
Yes, for both the CPS as well as the region, they're in good shape right now.
That's good. And the other thing I might want just to make an observation is that it looks like because the school committee is asking for more information as far as the financials from the administration, they're getting it, but maybe they haven't come into the right balance, which is, you know, how much is too much information.
The school committee is getting what?
More involved with the finances when they talk with the school administration. So the
the school committee itself.
school committee.
Yeah.
Yes, the school committee.
Yeah, I think that what I was concerned about is that, yes, these documents were available.
Yes,
The DESI
that's
reports
good.
documents were available, but not the revolving funds, not the revolving funds account.
That's okay. No, I'm just.
And
I'm
there's
just summarizing.
some information there that I think needs to be sorted through. But everybody was fine with it as a first take, but they will be coming back to that. There was also a mention about the middle school, and that the superintendent said she is reviewing some of the design work with the designers. And she was happy to get back into it, but she also said that there was not a date yet where they were ready to commit to start again.
Great.
And I think that's it.
Thank you. Thank you. Greg.
So I had the Board of Health. The Board of Health, as you can imagine, has been doing nothing but COVID. I won't go through any numbers here because the meeting was over 2 weeks ago and they're probably a little bit stale, but they did give some, pretty good to the schools of how well they're keeping it under control and notifying people. So they've had just a handful of cases. So that's been really good. And I'm sure the whole town's been impressed by with what they're doing in that arena.
Yeah.
The other one was the municipal light plant. There was two big discussions. One was mostly on the storm that happened. If you guys remember that there was a significant storm a couple of weeks ago, and the challenge of addressing that storm in the COVID, because they couldn't have as many people on the crews working at the same time. So they didn't have people in the office. So it was a challenge for the light plant. They got high marks and they did a great job on it. They noticed, that they could have improved some communication. So there's talk of communications, how to get that to the customers, because some people didn't have, cell reception or various other things. I took a note here just about there's electrical vehicle. I'll say it was a webinar. I forgot exactly what it was, but where they were demonstrating electrical vehicles. There was over 90 registrants for that. And they mentioned that Concord now has 453 electric vehicles registered. And I believe that is residents. I'm not positive, but I believe it was residents, not like town vehicles, but I'm not positive. They didn't mention that. They just said vehicles. A huge discussion on an RFP for advanced metering infrastructure. They kept calling it AMI. Nothing for the finance committee to really be aware of at this point from that, but they're just looking at sort of the next generation of metering, and it's been an ongoing process for a while. So that'll be something that, if we have a capital plan, might be good to put on that. And then the final thing was utility scale batteries. These are big batteries. Obviously a lot of people using solar that store energy in your house. And, if you lost power, the battery could suffice your electricity for 24 hours or so. But the light plant is also looking into potentially a larger scale investment of those that they could utilize for their purposes and the town's purposes. There's I think a $3 or $4 million price tag on that, but they still haven't confirmed what they want to do. So there's really nothing that the finance committee will be seeing at this point. So that's about it. Chris?
Greg, on the light plant, have they had any conversation about their reserves and looking at their they were supposed to come out with a policy, an updated policy on the maintenance of reserves. That was in one of our hearings. We heard that. Have they talked about that at all in any of your
They-
meetings?
Not in this meeting. They didn't talk anything about reserves because the two topics, the AMI and the storm, basically took up most of that time. So I haven't heard anything on the reserves in any meeting that I've been in to date yet.
Okay, thank you.
I'll keep an eye out for it. And I know, Mary, you wanted me to keep an ear out for another thing. And I forgot exactly what it was.
So have I. So have I.
So that's my
We're
report.
gonna have to watch those old YouTube videos and find it. If I think of it, I'll let you know, Greg. Are you done, Greg? Is that all you got? Thank you.
All good. Yep.
Dick.
There was nothing of material significance for the Finance Committee discussed at the Recreation Commission meeting last week. So I will save us some time and pass the baton to the next person.
Thank you, Dick. Wade?
So I went to the Concord Housing Development Corporation annual
We
meeting.
can't hear, I can't hear you, Wade.
I attended the
There you
Concord Housing Corporation annual meeting.
Yep.
We're keeping an eye on Junction Village. So Junction Village is still moving along. The property has not been transferred yet to Grantham. They have a roadmap for getting there. And they're kind of sticking to their milestones, but I'm not exactly sure when that's going to happen. The one thing that's really relevant, I think, to finance is that the Affordable Housing Trust, it looks like the legislature is not going to be able to move forward on these home rule petitions that deal with there was like a 1% transfer fee and additional building permit fees to require legislative approval. Doesn't look like it's going to happen in this coming fiscal year. So in lieu of that, they're going to be asking the Concord Affordable Housing Trust will likely be looking for another $500,000 as a warrant item for next year to fund the trust. The other source of funding is not available. So it's interesting to hear what Christine was saying about the CPA money. I think those things are not connected. So there's a commitment from the town to continue to fund that trust and find a mechanism to do that.
Well, actually, there wasn't a commitment from the town. It was every year they come and ask for another $500,000 from free cash. And the original, the proponents of that said that they would come in for 3 years until they actually got some other source of funding. And now what I'm hearing from you is that that other source of funding might be delayed.
Right. The other source of funding is tied up in the state legislature. There's 2 bills pending, but the bills haven't been heard, and I'm sure this is delayed because of COVID.
The select board did talk about this at their meeting when they were talking about their goals as far as whether they want to come forward with the third $500,000 ask from free cash. So we'll see how that plays out.
Yeah, so that's really all I have to report.
Yeah, and it was the CHDC who came, that they are the requesters at the for the CPC money. There are other groups that.
I wonder if it's the same. I wonder if it's the same pool of money then.
No, it's not.
No, it's a different,
No.
Different pool of money. Yeah.
No, there's the $500,000 that we've done for 2 years in a row that comes out of free cash, and there might be a third year ask. And then what Chris is talking about is the surcharge, the CPC surcharge on property tax bills that's allocated.
Right.
So they're different. They're 2 different pools.
No, I mentioned they're 2 different pools, but is it the same? Is the $500,000 the same? No.
No, it's not.
No.
2 different asks.
In addition.
2 different asks. Yep.
I'm trying to connect a few dots here. Wade, the meeting that you attended was for the Affordable Housing Trust, and they're the ones who are managing these funds that we're allocating in these $500,000 chunks through warrant articles. Is that correct?
It was the Development Corporation.
Oh, the Development Corporation was the meeting you went to. Okay, that's all I need to hear. That's
Yeah.
fine.
Right, so they would potentially be recipients of this money to go ahead and
Yeah.
do some acquisitions.
Yep.
There's nothing on their radar for acquisitions. The only thing, the 3 projects they're managing are there's 930 Main Street, which is Habitat for Humanity project. There's 229 Main Street, which is still in a very early stage, and then there's Junction Village.
Okay, I gotta ask a question here. Didn't the town just approve to set up a, I don't know, a trust
Yep.
that would manage this money?
Yes,
That's
Okay. And now the CHDC is going to that trust to ask them for the money that's already been approved?
They can't go to anyone because there's no trustees yet.
Right.
Okay.
That's the
got it.
problem. So that's,
Okay.
they said, we're happy to go there too, but there's no one to talk to yet. And the
Huh.
CPC's process had already kicked off.
Got it.
Yeah, they're not trying to double dip. I think they're just trying to manage through timing, it sounds like. And because they don't know yet what the rules are going to be around the distribution of those funds. I mean, they know it's for affordable housing, but what I assume the trustees, or they assume the trustees will set up some criteria. And as Dean mentioned, the CPC has, as part of its mandate, that they would cover some affordable housing. So they have an avenue there. But you're right. I assume once that gets figured out, they'll go there as well. They'll go to the
It's
town.
10%, it's 10% of the money that they allocate that has to
that's
be
the
affordable?
minimum.
That's what Dean
That's the minimum.
Yeah.
Okay, so that would be what, like 170,000?
Yeah.
Probably.
So it's
Probably
not-
200,000.
It's not a half a million.
Timothy Wheeler House would be affordable housing money, because that's an affordable living arrangement for.
That's a
everyone.
good point. Yep. Okay. A lot going on with affordable housing. I'm glad you went to that meeting, Wade. Thank you. Brian, what you got anything you want to tell us?
Hey, everyone. Library committee met, nothing to report on the financial side. The only thing of significance that you guys should be aware of is that the Library Corporation trustees held a small groundbreaking event October 14th. So they are well on their way to building out the new addition to the main library. So that's a really big step for them. They were able to get through the legal woes that they were actually having, and all good. So other than that, the library is open. They are taking appointments if you want to physically go in. The drop-off seems to be working, and the library is doing well. Thanks.
Great. Yes, it is. Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Parashar, anything on the planning board?
Nothing on the planning board. On the long-term planning task force, we had a meeting on the 21st of October. Talk a little bit about the presentation we're planning to prepare for the public hearing. We talked a little bit about pros and cons of standing committees. And then we also talked a little bit about the facilities report from 2002 to 2003. I mention all of this because we learned a couple days ago that apparently the meeting was held in violation of the open meeting law because the notice wasn't put up in time. So the state has told us we have to literally repeat the whole meeting over again. Which, given that we're on Zoom, I don't know why they couldn't just put the YouTube video up. Because literally they told us to recreate the entire agenda and all the discussion, even though we didn't take any votes. So you will hear the same report the next time we chat.
I assume that happens because somebody complained, like they didn't get the memo, so they couldn't attend.
I don't know. No one has attended previously, Dean? Maybe Carrie, do you know what happened?
We actually discovered it on an administrative basis, but unfortunately, the town clerk's office is overwhelmed with the election, and the agenda was sent over to be posted timely, and it just got buried in the hundreds and hundreds of emails that they are receiving on a daily basis. So yeah, but there was not a complaint from the outside. We found it internally.
I don't think anybody on the outside knows we exist.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. They do.
I think we could just replay the Zoom video and pretend that.
I vote that we'll have a drink. That's
Just
what
for the attendees.
Great idea. Okay,
That's all I
Parashar,
have.
is that okay? Thank you. So Phil, when is the Cambridge Turnpike going to be done?
There you go.
That's a good question. I did read something about it. It did not come up at the recent Public Works Commission meeting, but I did read that it's going to be done before December, or by December. But there was nothing of financial significance in the Public Works Commission meeting.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Phil. Okay, Carrie, you're up. What would you like to tell us?
The only thing I wanted to mention to you is on Monday night at the select board meeting, they will be hosting the classification, the tax classification hearing, which is essentially the first step in officially setting the fiscal 21 tax rate. So anybody who's interested, you can tune in at 4 o'clock. The Board of Assessors will be there and they'll walk through the total town valuation and talk about how we arrive at a tax rate. And I can't give you the tax rate because we are going to finish up all of that work tomorrow. Typically do the tax classification hearing at the middle of November, but we were lucky enough to get our new growth certified really fast this year. And, you know, because of the pandemic and the acceleration of positive cases, we had an opening on the agenda and we took it, much to the dismay of the town accountant, who's not ready to deal with this yet, but we're moving forward on Monday.
Good, I'll be there.
Okay.
Okay, the last thing we have is citizens' comments. Are there anybody on the line, Carrie, that's raising their hand?
There are no.
We have 0 attendees.
0 attendees.
Okay, but we do need to talk about the correspondence that was sent out today. That Carrie sent out. It was from I think it was from Dory Keogh about White's Pond. And I wanted, so I think she made 2 points. One is that there was a survey that's being used to determine what kind of improvements will be made at White Pond. And I'm just curious, how many people here were aware that there is a survey available? Dick, were you aware? You're on the recreation.
And even I wasn't aware of that. So
Right. So I think she made a good point, okay, that this is a survey going out that might guide what kind of improvements we make there, and yet the survey doesn't seem to be widely publicized. It seems to be going to people who already are on the recreation committee's distribution list. So that, I think she made an excellent point. I'll open it up to other comments in a minute. And I think her other point is that there are some improvements that are going to be made that are, I think, weren't really what was told to the town when we agreed to accept this gift. So I think I was at that meeting. We agreed to accept this gift. It was a contentious vote. We agreed to accept it. We thought that we would have to spend, the number thrown out was 1.6 million, but that the property would pretty much be, the operating expenses would be funded with the fees from the people that were members. And it seems like that is, again, we've got, in my opinion, a little bit of scope creep happening here, where the land is now being talked about as becoming a park. And so I really take to heart what Dory said in her correspondence as far as a survey being used that isn't widely available. There was a hearing last night that wasn't widely publicized. Did you know about the hearing, Dick?
I knew there was a hearing. I was unable to attend it.
Okay, so at least you knew about it.
Yeah.
Okay, but there is a survey. If people want to go out now, there's a survey. I think it's on the town website. And
I just went there to the recreation department website while you were talking. There's no mention of a survey there.
Right. So I think Dory has a really good point that if we're going to use surveys to guide improvements that we make to town-owned property, we should make the survey widely available and not limit the distribution to people who might have a particular interest. The other thing is
Oh,
that
there it is. I'm wrong. Sorry. It's at the bottom.
It is there.
It's at the town. Yeah, but it's on. Yeah, it's on
On
the.
the town website. Okay.
The town, it was actually posted today.
It was posted today. Oh, good. Well, okay, I guess somebody listened. But then again, I know they're asking for money from the CPC, and we've got it in my municipal capital plan. I don't know how much we have. I don't remember that. But, I am concerned about scope creep with White Pond, because that was not how the town agreed to it when we voted. Now, the town might decide that they do want to expand. But I'd like that to be a broader conversation. So those are my editorial comments. Any other comments people have about the correspondence?
Does anybody know what the Hale Memorial reference is in her letter?
Yeah, I don't. I thought it was interesting. It sounded like there was also some unusual deeding associated with the
I'm
gift.
inclined to try and look that up, so.
Yeah, I didn't, yeah, I was fascinated by her comments, so I want to go back and, would the hearing have been on YouTube? So I want to go back and look at it.
I don't know.
It should have been taped. It should have been taped, at least.
It should have been.
Because it is a hearing.
Yeah, okay.
It'll
So I
take
think
probably a
we-
couple days to
yeah.
get it up.
I mean,
Well,
I've sat through that presentation. So Kate, I assume it was Kate Hudson, the assistant town manager's presentation. So at CPC, she gave
Yeah.
a big presentation on it, just, I don't know, was it last week or 2 weeks ago? And this is what they call phase one, and that's the 1.7 million, that phase one, and it's focused on two pieces. One is this access issue, which is pretty expensive, because they've got to do they're proposing 2 walkways. And that was one of the things they were going to seek input on at this hearing. And then the other is stormwater drainage. Those are the 2 things that they're going to try and fix with this. And they say that's what they think the top priorities are to be fixed.
But I guess I'm still confused as far as what they're doing with the money that they've already been allocated.
I think it was banked, Mary. So I think everything that they've asked for before has not been spent. They've banked it to come up to 1.7 million, and now they're going to get ready to start. I'll go back and look at my notes, but
Okay,
I
I would really thinking forward. When we make our recommendation on the CPC article, I would really like to understand how much money has been allocated to date, how much more, and what exactly it's being spent on. And also if some of the money is being spent on things that are beyond what we thought we signed up for when we agreed to take the gift, I think there should be broader community input than a pretty narrow survey. That's my editorial comment.
Greg is signaling that he has something to say.
Greg.
Well, it's just, I think the Hale Memorial, if anybody remembers, I went to one a while ago. There was going to be a memorial to the previous White Pond owners, I think up in the parking lot or something like that. I believe that might be referring to that memorial there. I don't know if anybody else went to the White Pond meetings about a year ago or so.
It sounded like there would be a permanent marker of some sort.
Right.
Created for something.
Yeah.
I thought
like a stone or something like that.
And this is something that we want to do, or is this something we're required to do? Because
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know the answer.
Requirement.
Is a requirement?
Well, that's what it sounded like from the email. That's what I mean. I want to go look into this and see.
Okay. Yeah. So, thinking forward, this is something that we'll talk about more. And this is something that the rec department is championing in this. So.
Well, it'd be interesting to get to have the rec department respond to some of the issues that Dory has raised.
Should we ask for a response?
I think it would be a reasonable thing to do, wouldn't it?
So the question is, like, I'm a little upset about the lack of disclosure at the time this came to town meeting, but I mean, is it really our responsibility or authority to sort of inquire into all this stuff?
That's always a good idea. I mean, it's always a good question. And if you read the bylaw, it says that the finance committee makes recommendations on warrant articles. We publish a guideline. And if we want to make a recommendation on anything outside of that, it requires a vote of the meeting. Okay, so we can decide as a meeting, a group right now, that yes, we want to weigh in on this, even though we don't have a warrant article in front of us and it's outside of guideline spending. So that's the way that works. So I guess maybe the next step right now is to put it to the committee. Do we want to weigh in on this? Do we want to send a letter to the town manager or the rec department and ask them for answers to these questions?
I think it's a good idea.
I'm sorry? You think it's a good idea?
Yes.
I have a proposal that we put that off for one meeting and have each of us go and do our own little, like, based off of Dory's letter.
Yep.
It raises more questions for me than anything else, and I would like to get a little bit more information before.
You want to do some research? Okay.
Yeah, I just like to do some. I'll do some of my own, and anybody else who wants to can, and then we can have a more informed conversation about what some of the elements that she's referring to really mean. Otherwise,
There may also be a response from out of the town manager's office by the time you have your next meeting as well.
okay.
Right.
We may want responses beyond what we can still talk about it. There might be further questions we have. I don't know. Lois, you had your hand up.
No, I'm just to agree with Dean,
Okay.
that I think it's a good idea for us to have more information.
Okay.
And-
So we want to go off on our own. So you're saying go off on our own and get information and talk about
Yeah.
it in our next. Is that what you're proposing, Dean?
Yeah, that's what I'm just picking up on Dean's suggestion.
And you're seconding that. Okay, that sounds reasonable. Yeah, that sounds good. Okay, anything else that anybody wants to talk about? Thank you for being, wow, this is a late meeting. I always try to get out of here by 9. I missed by a little bit, like 50% mistake. But anyway, thank you all. We got a lot done tonight.
All right.
We'll see you.
Thanks.
Good night, all.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Good night.
Oh, do we have to
Bye. Oh,
adjourn?
no. We have to make a motion.
Yeah,
Somebody
yeah.
needs to move.
So moved.
I move.
Okay,
I
I need to
second.
do a roll. Lois?
Yes.
Yes. Myself, yes. Kathy?
Yes.
Dean?
Yes.
Chris?
Yes.
Andrea?
Yes.
D?
Yes.
Greg?
Yes.
Nick?
Yes.
Wade?
Yes.
Brian?
Are you sure you guys don't want to stay longer? This is fun. Come on.
Is
Yes.
that a no? Is that a
Yes,
no?
yes, yes.
Said
yes.
no.
There's
Yes.
Phil.
Yes.
Okay, it's a done deal. Thank you very much.
Good night.
Night, everyone.
Good night.